My sister was the kind of person who used justice as a weapon against others. She asked why I wasn't eating the sweets our aunt had so kindly brought. She called me awful and said our aunt would be very sad. I simply suggested she eat them if she was that concerned. My sister crossed her arms and sank into a tense silence. She only pushed me to eat them because she didn't want them herself. She always used guilt to manipulate others while posing as righteous. I decided I had to live a life entirely apart from her. From the passenger seat, she let out a slow, exasperated sigh. Whining, she asked if we had reached our destination yet. I tightened my grip on the wheel and told her to be quiet because I'd already answered. We pulled into the temporary parking lot for the fireworks festival. When I opened the trunk, she stretched and said she was tired. I checked our supplies and noted the bento boxes and drinks. A sly, opportunistic smile crossed her face. She asked which cooler had the alcohol and offered to carry the heaviest. My friend gave me a knowing pat, aware she was using a manipulative trick. Waving goodbye, she said they would go ahead and secure a spot. I ended up alone, stuck with most of the luggage. I sighed, relieved she had at least one thing, which was better than nothing. I steeled myself, knowing I had finally made it this far. Next year, I would leave for college far away and finally be free of her. Suddenly, a horrible tearing sound was followed by a scream. My face showed pure, uncomprehending shock. I stood in the forest, trying to figure out where the parking lot had gone. In total disbelief, I murmured that this was the parking lot. I was carrying our supplies, but the car was completely gone. I looked up at the unfamiliar trees and heard only birds. I couldn't tell whether I was camping or still dreaming. I frantically checked my phone and found there was no signal. I told myself to calm down and that I would find a town if I kept walking. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the dense, silent woods. Soon I reached a small, clear stream that sparkled in the sun. Sitting on the bank, I noticed how clear and beautiful the water was. I followed the river a bit farther downstream. The stream opened to reveal a wide, wind-swept coastline. Breathless from the long walk, I stood stunned by the scene. I had been walking for so long and hadn't seen anyone. It made no sense. A loud stomach growl cut through my confused thoughts. Finding the cooler box full of drinks and bento relieved me. I sat on the rocky shore and began eating to ground myself. I noticed the beach was pristine and free of plastic waste. I knew with grim certainty I had to prepare to spend the night. Evening fell as the sun began to dip below the horizon, stretching long shadows. Using the pliers from our kit, I carefully stripped the bark from driftwood. I appreciated the supplies my sister had accidentally made me bring. I remembered the survival shows, my only guide in this new reality. I started the hard work of making a fire with a bow drill. Unfamiliar work left me exhausted, my body straining with the effort. My hands started aching and trembling. My strength was fading quickly. I had to race the setting sun to start a fire. I was about to give up when a thin wisp of smoke appeared. Smoke poured out and I cried, suddenly filled with a desperate surge of hope. I blew softly on the fragile ember, carefully keeping the flame alive. When the fire finally took hold, I knew I had to protect it with my life. A dark forest closed in around me beneath a canopy of stars. A campfire crackled, a small beacon of light in the vast darkness. Worn out, I lay down, grateful for my jacket's warmth. I sank into a deep sleep, telling myself everything would be okay. I kept hoping that when I woke up, it would all be a dream. Morning came with cheerful bird song in the trees. I woke suddenly, my head still resting on my backpack. Seeing the smoldering campfire confirmed that my worst fear was real. They gasped in panic when they saw the precious fire was about to go out. I quickly added more wood and sighed with relief that it had been a close call. I went the opposite way from yesterday to find help. While scratching the itchy insect bites on my arm, I needed more firewood. Pushing through the dense undergrowth, I feel my resolve harden. I stopped suddenly, my eyes wide, stunned. I found myself on a high cliff overlooking an endless, empty ocean. It hit me hard that I was trapped on a deserted island. No mainland was visible, only other small islands on the horizon. The rustling in the bushes behind me made me spin around. Who is there? I sat, listened closely, and looked back toward the forest. A pair of legs emerged from the trees. I whispered to myself, wondering why. None of this made sense to me. I was only here because of my sister. I never wanted to go to the fireworks, and now I'm stuck here. I had wondered why I'd bothered with the fire. Then I remembered it was to survive. I stood with a blank expression, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. Searching for a way out, I came upon a beautiful, cascading waterfall. I was amazed that this island could have such a beautiful place. When I saw bubbles in the pool, I knew I had found a water source. I noticed this new strategic location was close to my first camp. A small smile crossed my lips as I thought my luck was changing. I moved my camp here so a ship might see the smoke. Knowing this would be a long ordeal, I started cutting logs to build a shelter. Panting with effort, I hauled the heavy logs through the woods. I set out to build a proper home by driving sharpened stakes into the ground. I drove a post deep into the ground, believing it would be sturdy enough. Concerned about the structure's strength, I decided to add more pillars. I had a quiet meal by a small fire in my half-finished hut. Facing my last bento, I knew I had to find a new food source. A sudden noise in the bushes outside made me jump. I peeked out of my shelter and sensed a nearby beast. Thinking it was a boar or a rabbit, I decided to finish the walls. Exhausted on my makeshift bed, I longed for a simple bath. Morning arrived, the sky alive with birdsong. I found a river full of schools of fish. Wading into the cool water, I splashed while trying to catch one. I held my prize high, grinning triumphantly. All right, wading into the shallow river, he finds the fish surprisingly easy to catch. His first catch sizzles and crackles as it roasts over a makeshift fire. Taking a large, satisfying bite, he enjoys his first real meal in this new world. In his shelter, he chews slowly and wishes he had some salt for flavor. To conserve his remaining bottled drinks, he starts drinking spring water. As he drifts off to sleep, he decides to work hard on his house tomorrow. Kneeling, he digs a trench around his hut to keep the rain out. He carefully plastered the wooden frame of his shelter with thick, wet mud. Wiping his brow, he feels proud of the steady progress he's made. Planning the roof, he decides to use a vinyl sheet as a temporary window. The dense forest canopy provides plenty of branches and leaves for his roof. Lighting a fire in a stone-lined hearth, he channels warmth into his HUD. Inside, he sits satisfied that he managed to build a rain-proof shelter. The stones give off a gentle heat, keeping the cold nights at bay. A bolder plan forms in his mind. He will build a bath next. Surveying the small stone pool he built, he decides it will be enough. Using long sticks as tongs, he lifts a red-hot rock from the fire. He helps while the hot stones shatter on contact with the cold water. He resolves to be more careful with the fragile, hot rocks. He sinks into the steaming water and lets out a deep, blissful sigh of contentment. Relaxing, he dreams of cooking stew, tired of plain grilled fish. Autumn leaves catch his eye, a clear sign the seasons are changing. Shivering in the bath, he notices the air growing colder. His handmade clay pot gently bubbles over the crackling campfire. Sipping his stew, he wishes for more knowledge to broaden his limited diet. The once vibrant forest fades as winter's chill sets in. Facing his finished hut, he sees a sturdy monument to his survival. Smiling proudly, he thinks it could be improved, but it's still a success. Looking up, he sees snow has already covered the distant mountain peak. Trudging through the first snowfall, he faces the biting cold as a serious new threat. Seeing mushrooms on a log, he isn't sure if they are safe. Choosing not to eat them, he knows the risk is too great. Night falls on his lonely hut, the only sign of life in the wilderness. A sharp chop of his axe echoes through the cold, silent air. Huddled inside, he tends the small fire to keep it burning against the cold. A cloud of breath rises as he realizes snow will soon fall here. Worried that his fish are becoming scarce, he thinks about his dwindling food stores. He doesn't know how much longer he can keep going or how long he can survive. A sudden noise inside his hut makes his eyes widen and alarms him. A bright streak of light cuts through the darkness of his tiny shelter. Sitting by the dying embers, he is startled by a sudden, unexplained phenomenon. A chilling thought crosses his mind that he might finally die here. Clutching his knees, he is overwhelmed by the crushing weight of his loneliness. A zipping orb of light appears. It utters frantic apologies in a high-pitched voice. Startled, he steps back as the light circles him and apologizes for his situation. The orb of light says he was drawn into a hero summoning. It tells him now that this is no longer the world he knows. Only able to stare in utter shock, his mind cannot process the words. The orb repeats its impossible message, cementing his terrifying new reality. He asks the orb if he was merely collateral damage. Grabbing at the light, he demands to be sent back, but the light says it cannot. The orb says the summoning was intended for people on the brink of death. He can't make sense of it and keeps saying this cannot be his world. Demanding to know what this place is, he wears a mask of confusion. The orb gives him a vision of a fantasy world and asks if this is it. He insists he has seen no monsters and then asks whether it is a spirit. The spirit says it used to be a god, but the summoning drained its power. It says its power returned quickly, even though it remains weakened. The spirit says the summoning was meant to briefly link the two worlds. The explanation rambles through complex ideas of deification and leaves him completely confused. The spirit revealed the hero candidates were 3 humans on the brink of death. It apologizes again, saying it didn't realize he was busy with him. Stunned, he shouts in disbelief upon realizing the summoned hero is his manipulative older sister. The grim truth hits him. He must have been about to die too. Looking back, he realizes the human world had been in trouble. A group of powerful, divine beings suddenly appears before him. Surrounded by a pantheon of gods, he is overwhelmed by their presence. The small Orpenix begged one of the gods not to reveal a secret. Sternly, the god, the Fun, tells the panicked door it is too late. Buffon will handle the boy's fate later and ignore the orbs, please. Misha, the young goddess, steps toward him as the orb turns into a wolf. The spirit says Rish failed, so the summoning spread farther. He blames the spirit for the mistake, and the spirit quickly denies responsibility. Fafan glares, silences their bickering, and tells them to deal with it later. Goddess Val asked him which of the gathered gods he will choose. Fafan says he must pick a patron god to survive in this new world. They will grant him powers and tools drawn from his remaining lifespan. The Faun calls himself the god of power, fire, destruction, and rebirth. The same dark-haired man identifies himself as Roardale of earth, silence, and magic. Gackle of order and magic is an old man with a long white beard. A serious young boy introduces himself as a child of water and healing. Val is the kind-faced old woman, goddess of the earth and his harvest. Misha, a cheerful young girl, introduces herself as the goddess of light and wind. Her alpha, the beautiful blonde, is the goddess of light, love, and beauty. Haralpur says Rish the wolf has lost almost all of its power. Glaring at the weakened spirit, he is irritated by its earlier overconfidence. He asked whether the powers of the various gods overlap. Buffon says many beings appeared, but only the strongest survived. He weighs which of these powerful gods to choose. He studies the gathered gods, unsure if he must choose them all. Gull says choosing everyone would make their powers weaken each other. He points out that the gods do not get along, so cooperation is unlikely. How strong his blessing is depends on how compatible he is with God. Explain how relationships, love, friendship, or obsession affect power. Completely lost, he can't keep up with the complex divine rules. Galad advises him to decide what he wants to achieve in this world. He asks himself what he truly wants to accomplish. He wants a comfortable life without any unwanted obligations. He desperately wants nothing to do with his sister. He wants the power to travel through this new world freely and without restriction. He should explain his sister's strong sense of justice, which she uses as a weapon. Gallic explains that his power grows only when his sister is active. He urgently asked what powers the gods had given his sister. When he learns she holds all the magic and all the power, he feels a deep dread. Noticing his desperation, the god Gockle prepares to give him an appropriate power. Gully lists many skills that end with severance for the ominous hero slayer. After taking in the terrifying name, he ultimately accepts the god's offer. They stand in the quiet dark forest beneath a sky full of stars. Gal gives him a magnificent decapitation sword he needs to survive. The god of a fan gives him a heavy pouch of gold to start his new life. Mishit offers a small bag of powder that speeds up plant growth. Gali believes he should be the one to thank the boys for their understanding. The small wolf spirit Rish sleeps peacefully in the snow, its body twitching. He asks the gods to let him take the vulnerable little wolf with him. He says he'll protect it because Rish is powerless. Stroking the sleeping wolf gently, he tells it he's glad to have it. The spirit emits a soft, scenting sound as it accepts its new master. Buffon starts the transfer and warns him to be careful with his new abilities. Making a grand entrance, he vows to live a peaceful, comfortable life. Taking in the vast, snowy landscape, he is struck by its beauty. A manor sits in a valley with a small village visible in the distance. Admiring the beautiful scenery, he is surprised by how warm the air feels despite the snow. This is less a house and more like a mansion, he realizes. Catching his reflection in a mirror, he is shocked to see his younger face. Cradling Rish, he stares in disbelief at Rish's face, unsure what happened. Blushing, he realizes God chose his new appearance from 3 youthful options. Peering around a corner, he is still processing the sudden changes to his body. He steps into the entrance hall and is struck by the fine stone floors. A sweeping staircase with a wooden banister leads up to the manor's upper floors. A well-appointed living room features a fireplace and a plush, tufted armchair. Rustic, yet fully equipped kitchen with a large brick oven and ample countertops. Standing in a spacious library, he remarks on the room's impressive size. Peering into the next room, he wonders what else this grand house has. Discovering a massive pantry with shelves packed with food, he is left speechless. Holding Rish, he recognizes familiar foods and feels as if he is dreaming. He discovers a large wooden barrel full of live trout and salmon swimming inside. The familiar fish make him wonder whether they're connected to his old world. After months of starvation, his stomach growls loudly at the sight of so much food. Seeing his grimy hands, he decides to take a bath before eating. Easing into the hot, steaming water of the clawfoot tub, he lets out a deep sigh. Enveloped in warmth, he feels a deep sense of peace and happiness. Curious about polishing rice, he tries his new divine skills. Dressed, he stands before a large wooden watermelon, ready to work. With a steady gaze, he activates his powerful appraisal skill for the first time. He immediately understands how the mill works and is amazed by his new knowledge. The heavy wooden mill starts grinding. Its weight presses down on the grain. He finds the Rich asleep in the wicker basket he prepared for the spirit. He remembers that Rish gave itself to him, and he will sustain it with his power. Gently stroking the sleeping wolf, he promises to feed it meat once it recovers. In the kitchen, he skillfully slices a head of cabbage into thin, even slivers. He seasons a thick-cut sirloin steak generously with freshly ground pepper. A seasoned steak hits the hot pan with a loud, satisfying sizzle. He flips the steak expertly and admits he craves that strange combination. On the island, his diet was monotonous and nothing but fish. He lifts the lid off a wooden pot, revealing perfectly steamed white rice. The finished dish is plated beautifully and gleams with the promise of delicious flavor. Clasping his hands, he offers a sincere prayer of thanks for the meal. Using his knife and fork, he cuts into the thick, juicy steak, ready to eat. He lifts the first perfect, juicy bite of steak to his mouth. The flavor hits him, and he can only manage one amazed word: delicious. He savors the juicy meat, fluffy rice, and crisp cabbage, a perfect combination. Alone at the large table, he realizes he survived. Settling into the soft, comfortable bed, he enjoys a luxury he hasn't had in months. Drifting off, he's grateful he no longer fears his fire going out. Accepting his new reality, he knows he must live in this unknown world. The next morning he wakes and finds the bed almost too soft to sleep in. Dawn breaks over the roof of his new manor, starting a new day. A week later, he's hanging laundry in the yard to dry. Most of the week he slept to recover from the harsh life on the island. Rested now, he finishes his laundry with a satisfied smile. In the kitchen, his skills help him find recipe options for different ingredients. Missing his old world, he considers making ramen. With kelp on hand, he has no way to grind the wheat into flour. Glancing at the sacks of wheat, he knows he cannot use them until they are milled. On the table sits a simple, comforting meal of grilled fish, soup, and rice. He chooses a simple meal, savoring the familiar, comforting flavors. Planning to mill his own flour, he will shop for containers to store it. Spreading the large, detailed map the gods gave him, he plans his first trip. Scanning the map, he searches for the area the gods pointed out. After finding his destination, he uses his transference skill to travel there. He appears on a hill. The walled city of Kassam spread out before him. Spotting the frontier city of Kassam on the map, he relies on his gifted knowledge. He knows Kassam is a hub where adventurers gather to hunt monsters in the nearby forest. A guard at the city gate asks to see his ID and travel permit. Explaining his situation, he notices the other adventurers staring at him. He isn't sure whether his new clothes or his divinely altered face make him stand out. Wearing a new hooded cloak, he feels free to explore without attracting attention. At a market stall, he examined rough-spun cloth and noted its poor quality. Inside a general store, he looks through the items for sale. While shopping, he finds a few items he needs and thinks of his companion Rish. Clutching his coin pouch, he knows it is a large sum from the gods. A strangely shaped ornate bottle on a nearby shelf catches his eye. He recognizes the elegant bottle as a potion, a familiar item in video games. He uses his appraisal skill to learn what ingredients it contains. Passing a food stall, he looks at the food, curious about the cuisine of this new world. Inspecting the sausages reveals bacteria and makes him recoil. A ladle being used at a nearby stall startles him. Noticing a magnificent grape trellis, he decides to look for farm tools. Approaching the shopkeeper, he asks to buy the pitchfork he sees in a crate. He asked the woman if he could take a small cutting from the grapevine. With his shopping almost done, he spotted the weapons shop. The kind shopkeeper noticed his new face and suggested he buy leather armor. Metal armor in the summer heat sounded unbearable, so he quickly decided against it. Smiling, he thanked the old woman for her helpful advice. Walking into the weapons shop felt like stepping into a video game world. He drew his blade because it was the easiest to swing. Evaluating the other weapons was too confusing. so he relied on his own. He bought goat monster leather armor, a pouch, and a large sack. Dust settled over this town, and he felt worn out from the day. By the gate, he rested and chose not to use transference in public. He had to return to his manor, drop off his gear, and check on Rish. Under a starry sky, he decided to visit the Adventurers Guild tomorrow. The next day, he stood in front of the large, timber-framed guild hall. Inside the busy tavern, he stepped up to the counter to check in. After the receptionist explained the registration options, he chose to pay the fee. While she prepared his tag, he said he also had a request. Waiting, he reached for a thick, time-worn book on a nearby shelf. Reading about the forest of monsters, he learned it was a valuable resource. It explained the local terrain and how to use monster parts. A cheerful youth interrupted his reading as a figure approached. A burly adventurer asked whether he was the one looking for an escort mission. A novice, he wanted to learn from a safe party. Dean, a silver-rank adventurer, introduced himself as his guide. To the protagonist's surprise, a silver ranker accepted such a simple quest. Caught up in the moment, he agreed to the day's arrangement. He realized he was being swept along by Dean's forceful energy. The twin-tailed girl stormed over and told Dean not to make decisions alone. Dean brushed off her complaints and told her not to be picky. The protagonist bristled at the thought of the guild's favorite, tedious, noble quest. He tried to make it clear he didn't want to get involved in their drama. The girl argued with Thien because their partner Chris kept getting all the good jobs. From the side, she gave the protagonist a pleading look. Dean said he didn't want to be tied down by the guild. With his arms crossed, he refused to be tied to a single partner. Emil leaned in and asked him gently for his cooperation. She pointed out they were siblings and that he was being too indulgent. Another girl, Kina, appeared, calling out the meal's name with obvious exasperation. Kana told Dean calmly that this was the consequence of spoiling his sister. He was reminded that he could refuse the escort the guild chose. The protagonist apologized to Kana for the embarrassing scene they'd caused. The word siblings upset him and reminded him of his sister. He told the stunned Dean he was withdrawing his request for an escort. Amo, completely misunderstanding the situation, beamed and thanked him profusely. He quickly denied her assumption that he would find another party for her. Turning to the receptionist, he said he no longer needed the escort. Dean called out, taken aback by his sudden change of plans. The receptionist apologized for the disturbance and offered to refund his fee. He requested the adventurer's handbook instead of a refund. Leaving the guild, he walked away as the building stood stark against the sky. On the street, a tired sigh escaped him. He vowed not to tolerate complicated sibling drama in this world. A playful, ethereal whisper asked why he wasn't using severance. The goddess Misha appeared and told him that he alone could see her. She told him to stay aware of her and the other spirits watching him. He thought she might be oversimplifying, but she insisted he stay aware. She teased that he might be having naughty thoughts, but he denied it flatly. Using his severance skill too often would be a problem, he thought. Mission explained that the skills affect weekends across a broader range of targets. He wondered aloud whether the power really decreases as the number of targets increases. She explained it affects people close to the target and causes them to avoid the topic. With a wink, she told him he could use it if he remembered. Meeting her gaze, he quietly thanked her for the advice. She smiled warmly at him, pleased to have helped. The moment she disappeared, a soft gust of wind swirled where she had been. He wondered whether a god had taken an interest in him despite his lack of power. At the city gate, he was ready to go alone into the forest of monsters. The guard checked the new adventurer's tag and waved him through. He left the safety of the city's high stone walls and stepped into the wild. The handbook said monsters roam was just outside the gate. He had read that the creatures he would meet had horns. The book featured illustrations of both horned and hornless rabbits. Alone, he decided it was time to test his blade. Summoning his weapon, he heard the name Decapitation Sword echo in his mind. Remembering his storage skill, he knew it could hide anything but living creatures. A rustle in the tall grass drew his attention. Turning, he saw a large white rabbit step out of the brush. The rabbit froze, its nose twitching as it stared at him. He relaxed briefly, assuming it was just a common animal. The rabbit lunged at him, its expression suddenly vicious. Stumbling back from the creature's ferocious attack, he cried out. He noticed dark, bean-sized horns around its eyes. A jolt made him realize this was a hornless monster. On instinct, he swung his sword, and the blade landed with a solid thwack. His eyes widened in shock at how effortless his strike was. One clean swing defeated the creature. It made him wonder how a regular shop sword would have held up. Another rabbit fell to his blade with the same ease. He realized that even an ordinary sword would have been enough against this horned foe. Looking out into the forest, he felt newfound confidence settle over him. Using his appraisal skill, he identified some herbs he had found. Finding wild raspberries, he was delighted by the forest's rich bounty. Pleased, he thought about how incredibly useful his skills were. A swirl of magic beside a tree trunk caught his eye. Recognizing the mushrooms, he knew they were the same type he'd seen on the island. His appraisal confirmed they were edible, and he was filled with regret. A sudden surge of dread hit him, putting him on high alert. He felt the presence of a monster, something much larger than a rabbit. His head snapped around, shock written across his face. A massive, horned, bear-like creature growled at him from the trees. The horned bear reared onto its hind legs and let out a terrifying roar. His eyes widened as he realized he was facing a large, horned monster. A dense forest canopy hung over the scene below. He scanned the clearing, still trying to process what had just happened. Staring at the fallen bear, he was awed by his sword's terrifying power. The goddess Misha suddenly appeared and asked why he wasn't using magic. After he scolded her for the surprise, she giggled and apologized sweetly. He admitted he'd forgotten about magic and thought it wasn't necessary. Misha suggested he search for monsters without having to walk around. Smiling, she urged him to test his exploration skills. He realized he had gained so many abilities that he hadn't fully processed them. He focused his mind and used the exploration skill for the first time. A targeting marker appeared in his vision and locked onto a rabbit in the distance. He regretted not using this sooner, and thought how much easier things would have been. Misha asked which magic he'd use, and that led him to ask about his attributes. She gladly listed the divine elemental attributes now at his command. The horned rabbit they had targeted burst from the undergrowth and charged him. Closing his eyes, he focused and pictured the spell he intended to cast. He thrust his hand forward and unleashed a powerful wind-slash-attack. An unseen gust of wind struck the rabbit and killed it instantly. Staring at his hand, he realized the magic had worked. Seeing the defeated rabbit nearby, he turned to Misha and thanked her for helping. She warned him to be careful because magic users had nearly vanished. A small whirlwind formed as he used his skill to store the carcasses. He decided to sell his goods after moving near the city gate. He had to figure out how to move his huge haul to the guild. He reached a large timber-framed building that served as a purchasing center. Approaching the counter, he politely asked the man to value his goods. Stunned, the shopkeeper dropped the enormous sack of kills. The man noted his surprising strength, which did not match his appearance. He remembered how neatly he had butchered the creatures before he brought them. The shopkeeper led him into a back room lined with hanging monster carcasses. His mental resistance made the gruesome sight bearable. He remembered that gutting fish on the island had been the most he could manage. The man praised his strong arms and the neat way he processed the hides. He refused to go to the Adventurers Guild despite the offer of more money. A dark expression crossed his face as he remembered his siblings' chaotic adventure. Then he asked the shopkeeper where he could learn to make potions. The man explained how the guild system worked and offered to sell him the recipe directly. The boy accepted the man's offer, understanding what it meant. He held the newly acquired potion recipe written in a script he did not recognize. It surprised him that recipes for everything from cork were now more widely available. Reading the instructions, he found potion making surprisingly simple. He chose to make potions to hide his healing abilities. Just as he was about to leave, the shopkeeper called out to him. The man asked whether he had found a magic stone and offered to appraise it. His eyes widened as he remembered the mention of magic stones. The man held a small, sparkling red gem that was the crystallized spirit of a monster. He identified it as a valuable red spinel and congratulated him on the find. The boy who thought it was just a pebble gave a puzzled thanks. Seeing its potential for powerful fire magic, the man offered to buy it. He agreed to sell immediately because he could still use magic without it. Dusk fell, and the half-timbered buildings of Kazam were cast into shadow. Deciding to explore the town, he grabbed a bite before nightfall. Wandering through the streets, he took in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. He ended up in a bustling evening market full of activity. His gaze went to stalls piled high with wheels of cheese. Other vendors sold cured salamis and long strings of plump sausages. He noticed hearty sandwiches filled with what looked like shredded cabbage. He noticed bread with sauerkraut, sausage, ham, and cheese was common. Using his appraisal skill, he inspected some sizzling sausages on the grill. He decided they looked done and ordered one from the vendor. He bit into the hot grilled sausage with a large, satisfying bite. He thought the greasy, high-calorie food was perfect for adventures. Bins of assorted dried fruit then caught his attention. Curious, he bought a small bag and put a piece in his mouth. Recoiling in shock, he said it tasted extremely sour. He realized it was likely an ingredient for desserts or savory meat dishes. He saw a woman at another stall selling something that looked like brown sugar. The retro-balance scale she used charmed him. A strong smell of alcohol made him wonder about the legal drinking age. Continuing his walk through the bustling market, he felt a simple joy. A commotion up ahead drew his attention and made him wonder what it was. He craned his neck to see what was causing the excitement. He watched a massive whole pig being roasted over a large fire pit. Excitement brightened his eyes at the impressive culinary display. He watched as the vendor skillfully sliced the juicy meat for sandwiches. He eagerly bought one of the freshly made roast pork sandwiches. Holding a thick sandwich, he thought how delicious it looked. A huge, eager bite filled his mouth and the flavors exploded. Chewing happily, he said he'd definitely found a winner. Enjoying the juicy pork, he planned to roast one himself at home. Gazing at the starry sky, he decided to get a pig later. Late that night, his mansion stood silent beneath the stars. Returning home, he softly greeted the half-asleep curl in its basket. He realized his stomach had shrunk since he was on the island. He told the spirit about his successful day hunting and making money. Rich gave a soft, sleepy whimper in response to his voice. Soft, warm light glowed from his hand as he reached for Rich. His healing magic couldn't help Rich's magical exhaustion. He quietly hoped the small, frail spirit would recover soon. Preparing for bed, he said goodnight to his new peaceful home. The next morning was bright and clear, sunlight dappling the trees. A simple traditional breakfast of fish, rice, and soup was waiting for him. While leading, he thought the cloth used was poor quality. He wanted to use his language skills to read local books. Smiling, he decided to visit the royal capital that day. The capital city's immense size stunned him on arrival. Approaching the city guard, he said it was his first time visiting. The guard kindly handed him a small folded map of the city. The guard warned that the commercial guild could try to exploit him. A city guard thinks a wandering child in the plaza might offer directions. After thanking the guard, he bought a map of the magnificent royal capital. Walking away, the guard called to him one last time. A guard gave a useful, specific tip on finding a guide in the city. Moved by the guard's kindness, Jean thanked him again for his advice. Entering the capital, he hoped to avoid trouble in the new city. The city's architecture felt cramped, with buildings pressed tightly together. Using the map, he finally reached the central plaza he had been searching for. He remembered the guard's advice. Look for a man named Leon by the well. He noticed a figure with a long ponytail sitting on the edge of the well. He approached the figure cautiously and asked whether their name was really Leon. Their hostile reaction made him step back, startled and afraid. Leon glared at him, sharp and menacing, his eyes full of intense irritation. With a sharp snap, he said his name, and his aggressive tone frightened Joan. Terrified and stammering, he asked for a tour of the city. He said a city guard had recommended him. Leon seemed more annoyed when he learned a guard had sent the boy. He wondered whether he'd been tricked or had the wrong person. Leon sighed and reluctantly agreed, calling it fate. While they walked, Jean asked if there were any important sights to see. Lan said the castle had the best view in the capital. He quickly added that commoners were not allowed on the castle grounds. John couldn't understand why he would recommend a place that was off-limits. Instead, he asked for recommendations for shops or places to eat. Leon's expression darkened when he said he had to get to a famous restaurant. John couldn't understand why his simple questions upset his guide so much. Walking along the cobblestone streets, they heard their footsteps echo in the alley. During the tour, Jean noticed something unusual about the city. He asked why the houses were built so close together. He asked about the different taxes citizens had to pay. Leon listed the citizen tax, the traffic tax, and an unusual glass tax. The glass tax was imposed because windows were a luxury for the wealthy. He realized he hadn't seen many glass windows or many customers either. By pointing at the large building, he discovered it was a church for the spirits. Inside stood a beautiful courtyard fountain, a place where kindred spirits gathered. He realized that in this country, spirits were honored much like gods. Leon stopped and a thoughtful look crossed his face for a moment. Apologizing, he said he should have shown Jean the main tourist sites. After seeing his kinder side, Jane realized his guide wasn't such a bad person. Simple compliments seemed to push Leon into another angry mood. His voice was low and menacing, the words young master dripping with sarcasm. Suddenly, a well-dressed older man appeared and spoke to Leon in a familiar tone. Jean stared at the newcomer, trying to figure out who the distinguished-looking man was. Seeing the man's formal clothes, he wondered why he called Leon young master. Leon explained that Note served as the Adelhide family's butler. He demanded to know why the butler had suddenly shown up in the plaza. A grim look crossed Notes' face as he revealed an assassin was hunting Leon. A woman in military uniform arrived and urged them to leave the city immediately. Leon spotted Lilith, bringing another person into the chaotic scene. Pointing to the waiting carriage, she insisted they leave immediately. Leon stood his ground and refused to flee from danger. Calmly, the butler tried to present the escape as a strategic retreat. Growing impatient, Lilith grabbed Leon's arm and forced him toward the carriage. She quickly struck his stomach with the sword's pommel, knocking him to the ground. Note found the breathless Leon, who complained they were wasting precious time. Lilith felt brief remorse for the violent but necessary action. She demanded to know why they were not using a potion to heal him. Jean could tell Leon was still in a lot of pain. Completely lost, he was caught up in a drama he didn't understand. Seeing the crowd grow, Lilith urged them to move before they drew attention. John stood by the carriage, knowing he had to help. He gave his homemade potion to the injured Leon and his companions. Still a prototype, it passed his appraisal as safe to use. Lily looked at the strange boy and asked who he was and why he had helped. Jean introduced himself, saying he was just on a city tour. Note told Lilith they were heading to a shop. Lilith took in the new information and tried to make sense of the situation. She grabbed Jean's wrist decisively and pulled him toward the waiting carriage. Inside the carriage, carefully give Jean's potion to the groaning Leon. Tilting the vial back, Leon swallowed the healing liquid in one gulp. The potion took effect fast, and the pain in his face started to ease. Jean watched anxiously, his heart pounding, hoping his potion had worked. Now recovered, Leon sincerely thanked Jean for her timely help. Jean only wanted to be allowed to leave, his shopping trip completely forgotten. Leon looked down, still feeling the pain from the blow. Disoriented, he asked where they were, and a note told him they were inside. He insisted that while exiled, he had done nothing to justify fleeing. Lilith said his younger brother caused the current danger. His brother appeared to have committed another crime, making things worse. Completely lost, Jean tried to piece together the family drama. Note urged his master to retreat and questioned his decision to act as a guide. At last, the carriage stopped in front of an elegant building. Note called urgently to his young master using another name. Inside a tailor shop, Leon quickly asked for new clothes. He apologized to Joan for the violent interruption of their tour. John urged them to hurry, but Leon seemed content to leave it to the tailor. Earlier, Lilith introduced herself to Jean and revealed her noble family name. She offered him a ring as a token and told him to keep his distance for now. He took the ring, unsure what the future held for his new acquaintances. At last he asked why they kept calling Adelhide young master, a male title. Adelhide revealed with dramatic flair that she was a woman. John stood speechless, his mind reeling from the revelation. Adelhide said her boy's behavior and flat chest caused the confusion. Lilith left the shop with a final knowing wink. Apologize for the trouble and assure him the clothes are a gift. Alone in the elegant boutique, he wondered what clothes they sold. Maids immediately swarmed him, ready to take his custom order. He realized this was more than a simple clothing store and actually a high-end tailor. The fitting left him completely exhausted. In a quiet alley, he decided it was finally time to leave the city. At the end of a long day, Yane uses his storage skill to store his purchases. After buying sheets, a bed cover, and some books, he decided to eat before going sightseeing. He settles in for a simple, satisfying meal of meat and bread. Later, he settles into a quiet corner of the library to start studying. Arriving at his grand stone manor, he announces his return. Inside, he discovers his spirit wolf Rish and gently pats the sleeping creature. Leaning over Rish's basket, he decides it's time to read his new books. Settling by the window, he tries to read by the candle's dim flicker. As darkness falls, the candlelight is too weak for him to see by. Planning a proper lamp, he considers fuel and reflective materials. Suddenly, the goddess Misha appears and chides him for forgetting his own abilities. She tells him to picture the magic he needs, and he lifts a finger. He focuses on the word light, and an orb appears before him. Delighted, he says the magical light is very convenient for reading. At the end of a busy day, he feels satisfied with what he gained. Adelhide, the stern-faced noble he met, comes to mind. Not knowing what happened to her, he offers a silent prayer for her safety. Months pass, and his companion Rish sleeps peacefully in its basket. Suddenly, the small spirit wolf wakes, its eyes snapping open with new energy. Now fully recovered, Rish happily joins Jean on his walks through the forest. Pride in his preserved foods shows Jean's growing self-sufficiency. Over several months, he learned local crafts such as cheesemaking and carpentry. As winter approaches, he plans to build a separate hut for making potions. At work, he notices a small plant that brings back a memory. Remembering the cork tree seedling he bought, he decides it's time to plant it. Carefully, he sets the small seedling into a patch of soft soil. He decides to use Miss Shoot's gift, a magical powder that accelerates growth. He sprinkles sparkling dust over the newly planted seedling. A loud crack splits the air as the plant starts growing at an impossible rate. Jean watches in stunned silence as the seedling quickly grows before his eyes, standing in awe before the massive, fully grown tree that towers over him. He remembers using the same strong powder on his grape trellis and getting great results. Noting the tree will provide excellent material, he plans a trip to harvest it. Soon he returns to the familiar, bustling frontier town of Qasim. Fed up with inns, he decides it's finally time to rent a proper house here. Walking down the cobblestone street, he spots a handkerchief. He looks up to see the adventurer holding a meal and thinks she is here again. He remembers she has recently earned a reputation for selling potions. Deciding to ignore her, he walks past without a word. He knows buying tools without a local address would seem suspicious. The encounter confirms his decision, so he'll rent a house now. A real estate agent shows him a property in a narrow alley lined with stone walls. The agent says this newly built house is affordable and in a safe neighborhood. Jean notes that in this world, older, sturdier houses are often better. He tells the agent he will take the house and will help with the renovations. He practices his new skills, beginning with making cheese. Next, he begins plastering, carefully spreading mortar over the stone wall. He feels a man peeking at him from around the corner. Distant snow-capped mountains mark the change of the seasons. John feels the chill as someone in another town complains about the cold. Nearby, he hears someone lamenting that she's running out of money. He attempts to walk past her to avoid another tedious interaction. Calling after him, she hurries to catch up as he walks away. She warns him about winter dangers and asks if he is going into the forest. He thanks her for her concern and says he is aware of the risks. Grabbing his arm, she insists his life matters more than money. Firmly, he tells her he is not being reckless, and his stern tone startles her. Stumbling backward, she cries out and pretends she lost her footing. On the ground, she winks and says she just tripped. With tears in her eyes, she tries to pass off her clumsiness. Jean walks away, wondering why he is unaffected by her obvious attempts to manipulate him. Approaching the city gate, his path is suddenly blocked. Startled, he sees Emil's brother, Dean, standing before him. The brother braces himself, expecting another confrontation. Dean recognizes him from their chaotic first meeting at the Adventures Guild. Apologizing profusely, he clasps his hands together in a gesture of remorse. Dean says Kina, a member of their party, gave him a stern lecture. He admits their actions robbed the guild of a promising adventure. Jean listens quietly, accepting that Dean at least understands he was wrong. Dean admits the meal caused it, but she didn't mean any harm. Jean agrees to accept his apology, but says there is one condition. Dean looks puzzled and asks him what the condition might be. John insists that Dean stop his sister from ever coming near him again. Dean agrees reluctantly, his voice still showing hesitation. Then he asked whether Gina was sure, bragging about how cute his sister was. Jean is shocked by the man's powerful sister complex filter. Bluntly, he tells Dean the meal's behavior is creepy and not his type. Imagining his ideal partner, he pictures someone as reserved as Adelhide. After reconsidering, he admits to himself that a little assertiveness is good. Shifting the subject, Dean offers to show him where a rare herb grows. Jean's interest was piqued because he planned to gather herbs anyway. Dean gives a cheerful thumbs up. Please note that they've struck a deal. Jean observes that Dean is a normal guy, except for his obsession with his sister. They head into the lush, sun-dappled forest. Dean points to a plant with long, blade-like leaves. He says it's ginkgo grass, an herb the wealthy use to flavor their wine. Jean wonders whether it tastes earthy, while Dean finds the idea repulsive. Dean suggests they hunt some rabbits for their lunch. Jean finds he cannot use his magical transference or storage when Dean is present. They roasted skewered rabbit meat over a well-built campfire. During the meal, Jean praises Dean's passion and his skill in fighting. Dean teases him as saying Gina is strong enough to hunt bears for a living. Jean brushes off the compliment, saying he only relies on his arm strength. Dean looks at him skeptically, unsure how he can be so strong. Jean quietly vows he will grow bigger and stronger in the future. Dean's playful expression sharpens into a focused look as he watches Jean. With a sudden lunge, he pins Jean to the ground. He notes that Jean's leg strength is as incredible as his arm strength. A calm voice interrupts their scuffle as Adelhide emerges from the trees. Jean and Dean both look up, stunned by her sudden arrival. Gina freezes, recognizes the figure as Leora, and asks why she appeared so suddenly. Calmly, she says she is hunting a bear that was just stopping for some water. Jean knows it would be a serious mistake to reveal her name now. Dean asked whether they knew each other, and Jean confirmed they did. Introducing herself as Ash, she asks them to call her that. Dean gives his name, and Gina is relieved she thought to use an alias. Ash vows to repay him for the potion, but he brushes off her concern. Dean cheerfully pushes a skewer of lumpy cooked meatballs toward her. Grinning widely, he insists she eat it anyway. An unlikely trio gathers around a small campfire at the water's edge. Dean bows of Bear Hunt will pay for the potion and then ask about her expensive inn. Gina was shocked when she realized that 1 gold coin a day would be an enormous expense. They ask about her lodging, and she says it's just a room with a bed. She says a pink-haired guild receptionist recommended the Spartan accommodations. Jean and Dean instantly picture the flashy, troublesome Amel. Dean defends his sister fiercely, blaming the inn for any problems. Jean grows frustrated as Dean's reasoning about his sister becomes completely illogical. He says his constant worry makes him want to help, and he calls a meal a sweet girl. Adelhide coolly watches the interaction and figures out a meal the way his younger sister would. Dean flinches, unsettled by the intensity of her constant scowl. She reveals that something unbelievable happened. A spirit hovered near Amel. She explains that a mark showing the spirit's influence now rests on Dean's forehead. Confused and unable to see it, Dean asks what she is talking about. John is convinced that if a spirit is truly present, he can spot it easily. Suddenly, a single delicate white flower sprouts from the crown of Dean's head. Jean's cheeks bulge as he struggles to hold back a laugh. He tells the clueless Dean to stop looking at him so seriously. Observing the blossom closely, he thinks it looks more like a fake flower. Still apologizing, Jean reaches for the strange flower on Dean's head. A sharp tug pulls the tiny flower from its unlikely perch. As soon as the flowers were removed, Dean's eyes rolled back into his head. Dean falls heavily to the ground as John quickly apologizes. Adelhide says the spirit's hold was broken, and it seems Jean can see. He confirms he can, thinking of his spirit companion Rish. Rich is shown a spirit whose influence Jean is usually suppressed to keep things normal. Shocked to discover that only her father shared the sight, she suspects a bloodline trade. Only she and her father can see them in her family, she clarifies. She warns him to be cautious because his powerful ability is highly sought after. John looks concerned and agrees to heed her important warning. Jean Glance stands over the unconscious Dean and decides he must be silenced for now. He thinks it would be a joke if they left him, but no one has told him any secrets. Asha asks if he was worried her real identity would be discovered. She asked if Dean is his friend. He admits it's only their second meeting. A shadow falls over Adelhide's face, and she is stunned by his revelation. Shaken, she realizes her thought process mirrors Jones's exactly. Pressing a weary hand to her head, she admits it was her mistake. Jean watches her and thinks she looks like someone who attracts bad luck. Sitting by the fire, Jean brings up a new topic. When she asks if he can see her spirit, he wonders which one she means. A small bird lands on her head and keeps pecking at her. Jean is surprised by how attached the little bird seems to be. While the bird keeps working, he asks whether the pain is dull and constant. He asks if it hurts, and she calmly says she's grown used to the egg. He thinks even a sharp peck could turn into a dull, familiar ache. Jeanline stands inside, watching the tiny bird perched on her head with curiosity. He sees a strange band of light around the bird's neck, like a halo. Fixing his gaze, he uses his unique appraisal ability on the creature. The outcome reveals the spirit's plan to make her manly, leaving him stunned. He asks why she has put up with this for so long and what purpose it serves. She says it's meant to make her a fine heir, which prompts him to ask about a brother. She says her father was drunk when she was born, and John misunderstood it in a funny way. Growing up in a family that valued martial skill, her father gave her a spirit of strength. Finding the story odd, he doubts that strength alone makes a man. Confused, she admits she doesn't know the contract's specific details. He urges freeing the spirit, saying it appears to be suffering. Adelhide looks down and quietly agrees with his assessment of the situation. She explains it should have come out 2 years ago, but the mage fell ill. Turning to him, she asks with a hopeful voice if he can free it. He says he can handle the collar and suggests they try it back in town. Grateful, she agrees and promises a reward no matter the outcome. When he asks about her money troubles, her simple solution is to hunt a bear. He suddenly remembers that her original purpose here was to hunt a bear. From the clearing, a voice calls out a loud, heartfelt apology. Dean awakens, apologizes profusely while Adelhide explains he was only charmed. He sees the spirit's glowing mark affects those closest to the ammo most. Dean apologizes again, but Jean says not to worry about it now. Dean reveals his plan to bring a mill to a spirit's branch to contain the chaos. Jean remembers searching for a place like that and asks if one is nearby. Adelhide admits she doesn't know and suggests they simply listen for now. Spirit branches are sanctuaries of different sizes where spirits can find peace. Dean says he needs to return to town right away to make arrangements. Jean suggests hiring a transport service to move the bear, a phrase Dean has never heard. Ash explains the service helps adventurers carry heavy prey. He gives her a note with the transport details, and she accepts it gratefully. Pausing briefly, Jean adds one final important condition. Dean Wings gives a thumbs up and promises to keep Jean's secrets safe. Realizing Dean knew he had touched the spirit's mark, Jean waved goodbye. Instantly, Adelhide draws her sword ready for a fight. Jean matches her speed, his blade flashing as he prepares to fight. Swift attacks send a large wolf slumping to the ground. Praising his efficient fighting style, she offers a compliment he accepts humbly. He says he's just copying her expert technique with his own skills. The transport driver yells that the load cannot be moved. Straining under the weight, the driver told them to carry the rest themselves. From behind, the cart sags under the heavy weight of their load. Adelhide says their wolf hunt was profitable even though they failed to find a bear. Though she apologizes for the trouble, he shrugs it off, eager for a challenge. Adelhide worries that Dean could stay unconscious for several days. Jean looks over and asks where her loyal steward is. Note. She explains the notice on a separate task, and Jean's view about his bossiness. Jean offered his home and invited Adelhide to stay with him. We moved to his rustic timber frame rental house in Kasum. Inside, he welcomed her and suggested she sit on a nearby chair. Later, Adelhide praised his good taste in fixing up the old house. He caught the faint, wild smell of the forest wolves on her clothes. Unsure what to do about the bath, he said so and decided to ask her. He promised to prepare everything for her and asked her to wait. At the well, he decided not to take a steam bath because it seemed unsanitary. Soon, a hot bath stood ready beside the crackling hearth. Calling from the stairs, he said the bath was ready, and she thanked him. He used the time to change clothes and prepare the guest bed. Walking upstairs, he thought he wanted a bathtub. Later, a pot of tea and some snacks were set out on a small table. The shiny metal teapot waited, ready for their important discussion. Jean asked if they should start the unsealing. The refreshed adult Hyde agreed. She told him she was counting on him as he stepped closer. Eyes narrowed, he focused on the difficult task. Rue, a small spirit bird, kept pecking at Adelhide's temple. Adelhide murmured that the bird seemed unable to stop pecking her. He realized he needed to remove the glow from its neck. Suddenly, the bird puffed out its chest, its feathers glowing with restless energy. A frantic cry rang out, and Adelhide benefits from the spiritual backlash. He apologized as she suddenly began to slump forward from shock. He gasped and caught her as she fainted. The hand that had been clutching her chest dropped limply. He held her close and was surprised to feel how flat her chest was. Gently, he lay on this bed, calling softly to her motionless form. He debated whether to stop her from taking revenge on her father. He gently told the tired little bird to rest too. Adelhide and the spirit slept peacefully side by side on the same pillow. Watching them, John thought the unsealing had gone surprisingly quickly. He stayed to furnish the third floor for her while she slept. Preparing, he gathered books and other supplies. He brought a tray with a drink in case she woke up thirsty. Continuing his work, he made the house more comfortable. Back at his manor, he called for his spirit wolf companion, Rish. He apologized to the happy wolf for not giving it much attention lately. He gently scratched Rish's fluffy cheeks while it licked his hand. He thought again of Kasem, while Adelhide still showed no sign of waking. A powerful divine presence suddenly appeared behind him. The goddess's mission appeared in Val, accompanied by the god Vafon. Stunned, Jean asked why the deities had suddenly appeared at his home. Right away, the fun got straight to the point and said they had a request for him. Val asked whether he would be willing to name the spirits who had fled there. Misha said his sister was using magic recklessly and couldn't see them. The Fond complained that her stubbornness had been making a mess for a year. He said she was taming spirits but getting cocky with her power. John repeated Namina, his sister's name, and it sounded unfamiliar to him. It hit him that they were talking about that glowing orb from the summoning. Seeing she was still gaining power, he made his dislike of her clear. Mishit feared that once Namina could see spirits, she would dominate them. Fafon complained that the spirit's non-stop racket was unbearable. Val wept while explaining that the hero's actions would have widespread consequences. Jean asked what kind of effect it would have. Misha told him to see for himself. Pointing toward the window, she told him to look outside. Closing his eyes for a moment, he braced himself for what he might see. He snapped awake and looked toward the window. A terrifying swarm of tiny, glowing spirits pressed against the glass. Gasping in horror, he asked if they were all spirits. It was too much. Realizing he'd been living among them unseen, he knew it was better that way. Misha said they were drawn to his power and asked what he should do. Val recommended naming them to free them from his sister's control. It was mischievous that the spirits would choose him first before they were tamed. Overwhelmed, he doubted he could name that many. Fafan suggested using numbers and added he could rename them later if he wanted. Valagade added that spirits could receive new names from people they liked. Jean considered the spirit's pecking order. Someone they like ranks above him. Fafan told him the spirit's name would give him power. Jean understood. Misha said they should start outside because the spirits could not enter. She told the spirits to line up to be named in honor of his comfortable life. Jordan sat at the table and began the task by calling out their new names. Continuing down the list, he named each by color and number. An hour later, he reached yellow 52, but the line was still there. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the table and groaned that he needed a break. A small spirit drifted down and poked him repeatedly on the cheek. Jolting upright, he said he needed to check on Ash. Using his transference skill, he slipped away from his duties. He reappeared in Consume and let out a soft sigh of relief. Thinking he had escaped, he found the goddess Misha waiting. Surprised, he asked if she had followed him, and she only giggled. A small bird spirit flew to him as he neared the bed. Misha confirmed the little bird was a spirit, as he already knew. Jean said the person in the bed was Adelhide, who went by Ash. He told me to say that she had collapsed when he tried to release the spirit. Sudden, intense concern showed on the goddess's face as she looked at him. Dramatically, she said this was a first and a terrible pinch. Hovering above the bed, she repeated the dramatic declaration with a flourish. John froze when he realized Misha could clearly see Adelhide as a woman. Misha accused him of being a bad person who was about to take advantage of her. She wagged her finger playfully and told him he was wrong. Her hands rested on Adelhide's forehead as she offered a gentle blessing. Her intervention should make Adelhide fine now, she declared. She reassured John that Adelhide would be all right, leaving him very relieved. She said not to worry and guessed Adelhide would wake the next night. Misha then asked him what the little bird spirit was called. He remembered his appraisal skill had named it Rue. He said its old contract had been broken and a new one could be made. Misha told him the little spirit wanted him to name it. After thinking about the fluffy Chan because of its soft feathers, he decided against it. Looking closer, he saw its bright blue plumage and began to think. While searching for the perfect name, Jean asked the small spirit, "How about A's?" Nuzzling his cheek, the bird clearly shows its immediate approval of the new name. Smiling, he says he chose the name from the Italian word for blue. The newly christened one lets out a happy chirp as if asking to stay. Jean watches Adelhide sleep, knowing she will miss her longtime companion. Resuming his duties, he asks Mishut if they should return to the matter. He uses his transference skill to return to his estate under a starry sky. To his surprise, the gods Gakli and Rudale are also waiting for him. At his desk, he starts the long, hard work of naming the spirits. Finally, he finishes and is told the gods will return if more appear. A surge of power makes him try to cast a light spell, but Adelhide warns him to wait. It's too late. A blinding, explosive flash of white light bursts from his hand. Pain forces a cry as he shields his eyes from the blinding light of his magic. Adelhide watches, exasperated, and reminds him she explicitly told him to wait. After tempering the spell with darkness, she tells him it's safe to look. Mishad says the incredible power came from the combined gratitude of all the light spirits he named. Goddess Val warns him to master control, because such power is dangerous without proper visualization. Sheepishly, he remembers Misha's earlier advice to picture the magic and realizes his mistake. A loud growl from his stomach suddenly breaks the divine tension. He mumbles to himself that it's about time for dinner. Turning, he finds the entire pantheon of DAD staring at him expectantly. As a gracious host, he offers a tired smile and asks if they will stay to eat. The gods immediately call out surprisingly picky food requests, from honey to plain salt. He makes a simple, tasty meal of grilled fish and hearty pork soup. He takes a sip of the warm soup and quietly says it is delicious. Glancing up from his bowl, he takes in the surreal sight of his divine dinner guests. Mishut and Harolfa enjoy their honey and wine with quiet grace. The elder gods Gekul and Val seem content with plain bread and tea. John finds this scene strange and surreal. Young god Rordale happily spoons salt into his mouth and remarks on its special quality. Jean Asif is really okay eating only salt and concerned about the boy's well-being. The strange meal makes him doubt that spirits can eat food at all. I should explain that humanoid spirits can eat, but they cannot actually taste what they eat. She says they prefer to savor sensations like morning dew or the scent of flowers. As Jean processes this, his spirit wolf appears, clearly begging for a bite. He gently scolds the fluffy creature and tells it to wait until he finishes his meal. With a look at Rish, Fafan reveals that the small spirit was once his powerful master. Jean looks down at Rish, eyes wide and confused by the unexpected revelation. Mashat giggles, said the old Rish was unapproachable, but this version is undeniably cute. She apologizes and admits she is still a bit suspicious of the spirit's true nature. Her sudden shift in tone leaves John completely baffled. God explains Rich's tragic past as that of a destructive god who shook the very earth. Before it fell, the spirit was arrogant and crushed all who opposed its selfish will. Jean stared at the fluffy creature in shock and exclaimed that it was an alpha dog. Misha watches, completely bewildered by the unfamiliar term alpha. He describes an alpha as a pack's leader and explains how that dynamic can be unhealthy. To live by human rules, one must respect the proper order of things, he adds. Gali reminds him Rish is a spirit, not an ordinary wolf. Jean asks whether a fan of wolves and a fan of spirits are really that different, but gets only silence. Gal warns that Rish's is highly intelligent, stubborn, and should not be underestimated. Jean simply looks at Rish and muses that whatever its past, it is very cute now. Misha tells him to be careful, and he thanks her for her continued warnings and concern. Taking his hands, she calls him her precious person and notices his roguish charm. With the gods fading, Misha delivers a final, heartfelt thank you. She asked him to keep watching over the spirits, and he agrees before they vanish. For a brief moment, only he and the god Vavan remain in the quiet night. Buffon gives Risha a final pat, calls her the proud wolf, then leaves too. Buffon vanishes in a shaft of divine light, leaving Jean alone as he left her. Jin considers the god's words, thoughtfully repeating proud wolf to himself. Rish instantly rolls onto its back, playfully showing its belly in a silly display. Done with the night's excitement, Jean resolves to take a bath and go to sleep. The next day, he walks through the busy streets of the pottery town. He walks into a shop to order a set of custom postables. While he waits, he spots a fine tea set and decides to buy new dishes. He arrives at Malcolm's pottery workshop with its massive outdoor kilns. Greeting the craftsman, he presents his design for a new bathtub. Malcolm says he has also been thinking about a new product design. Jean listens closely, holding the scroll with his detailed plans. Malcolm mentions a timely inquiry from a noble in the neighboring Starling zone. A noble asks for a tub with cat's feet, and Jean immediately knows it's his sister's party. Malcolm eagerly asked for his help, figuring he might as well cooperate. Leaving the workshop, he notices how his past keeps finding ways to reach him. Returning to the rented house in Kassam, he checks on his recovering guest. Inside, Adelhide stirs, her brow furrowed as she slowly regains consciousness. Jean enters the room, as on his finger, and quietly asks if she is all right. Adele covers her eyes. Then they fly open in surprise, and she gives a small gasp when she sees him. Thanking him for his help, she asks if she has any painful injuries. Her back feels a bit sore, probably from being in bed so long. Out loud, she says she can't tell if she's been asleep since the morning, or only since the evening before. Jean calmly tells her it's been 3 full days, leaving her utterly shocked. Guilty about the trouble, she feels bad, but he dismisses it, saying he simply let her rest. He admits he took the liberty of renaming her bird while she slept. Gently stroking the small creature, she asks him what he chose to name it. He looks at her and simply says the new name he has chosen. A rare, beautiful smile lights Adelhide's face as she says it's a good name. She points out that the spirit's acceptance means it likes him, and John blushes in surprise. Stunned by her transformation, he sees how beautiful she looks without her constant scale. Noticing how comfortable he seems with him, she asks if that is true. She muses that she is not just a beautiful woman, but also a handsome youth. Flustered, Sheen suspects this newfound charm is a ploy to get him into bed. Adelhide looks at him, confused, and asks whether he tricked her. Jean Panic slowly realizes she is sitting up in the very bed he put her in. Waving his hands dismissively, he insists he never tricked her. He offers her soup and a place to rest, and she asks to stay overnight. Insisting she would never throw her out, she apologizes. Smiling, Jean tells her to get well soon so she can repay him for the end. Thinking of the infez, she calls him diligent. Later that day, they end up in a lively tavern in the city. Jean sees Note and Dean talking together at the bar. Pure relief floods Note's face as he calls Adelhide Ash-sama, glad she is safe. Jean watches from a distance as Adelhide and her butler Note stand together. Adelhide notes that some people have spirits, but none have flowers, and Jean agrees. A cheerful voice announces their arrival as the adventurer Dean has found them. Dean offers a drink to apologize for the earlier trouble and asks Adelhide what she thinks. Adelhide introduces herself as Ash and presents her companion, Note, as a former adventurer. Watching them, Jean thinks any pair or trio is the same. 2 large wooden mugs of frothy ale sit on the tavern table. Dean asked Jean if he had a type and mentioned his sister Amil. Dean explains that a male spirit affinity drew many adventures and asks Jean to keep it quiet. At last he admits his sister's spoiled nature needs to be corrected. People say a spirit's mischief can happen to anyone by accident. Adelhide warns that a spirit's prank can turn dangerous, as in Dean's possession. Dean acknowledges her point, and Jean realizes she is trying to warn him. Adelhide reflects that their unusual situation must seem strange to outsiders. Dean takes a deep drink and says he'll handle the payment for Adelhide later. He offers to find John because John is now living with his sister. A polite note informs Dean that they need 2 rooms for a short-term stay. Jean takes a sip of ale and notes that at 15 he can drink without guilt, though the taste is unimpressive. Dean calls to him, drawing his attention. He wonders why John acts like a mid-level adventurer when he is clearly different. Dean offers to introduce him to a dependable adventurer who handles requests diligently. John accepts the offer and says it would be a great help. Dean proposes meeting at the same time tomorrow in Jean, Greece. Hesitating, Dean says he has one more thing to tell them. He warns both Jean and Adelhide to be cautious about their unusual mutual attraction. Pointing at Adelhide, he tells her to stop searching when things get strange. Jean voices his agreement about her scowl, surprising Dean. Dean fumes that they're the strange ones while a man peeks around a corner, annoyed. Joan wakes in a soft bed, starting a new chapter while Rich sleeps nearby. Sitting up, Jean cheerfully says good morning to his spirit wolf Rich. Lifting the fluffy Rich into his arms, he feels it respond happily. From his window, he sees a snow-capped mountain peak and knows winter has arrived. Bacon and a sunny-side-up egg sizzle enticingly in a hot pan. He fills a pot with water to get ready to cook. He spreads a thick layer of plum jam on a slice of toast. He takes a big, satisfying bite of his breakfast. He finds the pairing of sweet jam and savory cheeses excellent. Holding his morning cup, he quietly thinks about the coming cold season. A painful memory flashes back to his first miserable winter surviving on the island. Now that his plates are empty, he gives thanks for the wonderful meal. He gets up from the table to prepare for his meeting in town. He steps into the familiar rustic streets of the frontier town Kazum. Wearing a dark hooded cloak, Jong introduces himself. Adelhide. Note arrived and introduced them as Ash and Note. Adelhide says she wants to properly settle payment for the potion. Jean tries to brush it off, but she insists on paying him back. She grows very serious, thinking he is being too reserved. Jean suggests they deal with it once her living situation is more stable. Adelhide agrees to his terms, and Note bows respectfully in understanding. When someone calls his name, Jane lifts his hand in greeting. Dean waves from a nearby doorway, beckoning him over. Dean introduces Retzi, the rugged man beside him, and Jean greets him politely. Brett's return is met with greetings, but he admits he's not great with formalities. Jean shakes the man's hand, unsure if this is the dependable adventure Dean mentioned. Retzi turns to Dean with a stern look and calls his name. Suddenly he pinches James' cheeks and complains that his pretty face will attract women. Dean winks, admits he is not as cautious as Gina seems. John's face lights up as he credits his good looks to the gods. She can call out to the startled Retz to get his attention. Red Sea turns to Sirius and agrees it's time for them to leave. Dean asks if Rezi is satisfied with simply completing the quest as normal, and Rezi confirms. John teases Retze that he might be insecure about his face, and Retze denies it. After completing his first official request, he steps into the snowy forest. Snow crunches under their feet as Retzi explains their main objective. In winter, Retzi hunts rabbits for their excellent meat and fur. He adds that bear pelts sell, but their meat is tough compared to a rabbit's. John says the reward for bears seems to have dropped recently. Recommend Jean take a look and say he and Ash are the reason. Pointing to the ground, he shows how to read a monster's trail in the grass. Jean is impressed and thinks Red Sea looks cool and professional. RETS explains that a rabbit's hind legs are bigger than its front paws. Jean correctly identifies a set of linear tracks as those of a fox. Retz confirms the nearby trail belongs to a horned rabbit. Jean asks how he can tell. Pointing to a faint, clear claw mark in the snow, Retz concludes a monstrous fox is hunting it. Jean is amazed by his skill. John realizes he's been relying on his skills instead of careful observation. Retz explains that his short bow works on normal animals but not on monsters. Calmly drawing back his bow, he keeps his aim steady and focused. Spotting his target, he shoots an arrow at a monster rabbit. The arrow hits its mark and the rabbit freezes, its eyes swirling. Retz says monster rabbits are easy prey because they come close out of curiosity. Gina Grease is asking if he can also watch him hunt a fox. In a local shop, a woman compliments Retzi's clean butchering skills. Impressed, Jean recognizes Retzi's strong social and professional skills. A server brings a round of celebratory drinks to their table in the tavern. Jean thanks Retzi for the day's lesson and says he learned a lot. Retzi thinks John is strange for enjoying a simple, practical hunting style. Jean, flustered, says Retzi's methods suit his slender arms better. Retzi laughs and urges him to drink more. Jean thanks him sheepishly. Jean's manor stood peacefully that night beneath a starry sky atop a snow-capped peak. The next morning, Jean rolls up his sleeve and gets ready to start a new routine. During push-ups, he collapses and vows to start strength training. Rich watches, confused. He arrives on a town street lined with neat, sturdy houses. He greets Malcolm, the potter, who welcomes him to his workshop. Malcolm proudly unveils the gleaming Finnish catfoot bathtub, and Jean is amazed. Jean thanks him, and Malcolm asks how he'll carry it home. An awkward smile crossed his face as he realized he had completely forgotten about that logistical problem. Unable to use his storage skill, he panics, and Malcolm suggests arranging a card. Jean quickly says he hasn't handled it, and asks the potter to just wrap it up. Malcolm and his assistant carry the wrap tub outside and ask if it's far enough. Jean watches Potter Malcolm discuss the custom bathtub project. Listening to the conversation, he looks slightly bemused. He hesitates to use his storage magic on something this large. Snow starts falling on the timber-framed house he rented in Kasum. John begins by carefully prying up the old broken floor tiles. Outside, he digs a trench in the cold to prepare for the new plumbing. Building the new wall, he places each brick carefully. Now that the main construction is finished, he smiles proudly at his handiwork. Standing triumphantly in the new bathroom, he admires the finished clawfoot tub. A sharp knock on the door breaks his moment of satisfaction. Adelhide stands there, holding a gift and apologizing for the interruption. She says she came to give him her moving-in greetings. Gina is happily surprised and asks where she found a house. Pointing to the building right next door, she stuns him with the news. Laughing, he realizes they are now very close neighbors. Adelhide says the note led him to the house, though she never gave him Jean's address. Jean thinks this wasn't a coincidence and was probably his fault. Then she admits she feels a strange, floating sensation around him. Her intense blush flusters him when she asks if he felt her floating. Quickly changing the subject, he invites her in from the cold. He offers her a warm cup of tea with a gesture. Sitting at the table, he thanks her for the gift and says he'll enjoy it. Inside the gift is a beautiful fig tart that looks delicious. He takes a bite and his fork clinks against the plate. It's the best dessert he's eaten in the whole town. Adelhide credits her butler, known for his excellent taste. A curious look crosses her face as she changes the subject. Arriving at his door, she asked what he was making. He explains it was a bath, something she finds confusing. She is puzzled by the odd idea of taking a bath inside her house. Deciding it's easier to show, he leads her to the room. Adelhide gasps at the sight of the elegant, modern bathroom. She asks if this really is a bath, and he confirms it. Softly, she murmurs she has never seen anything so beautiful. He asks her to be the first to try it after the walls dry. Adelhide asks if she may bring a note to see this incredible creation. A short pause follows as they wait for the butler to arrive. Note Piers stood at the door and politely announced his presence. Adelhide proudly shows off the new bathtub to impress her butler. She cheerfully reminds him she promised to be the first to use it. Jean starts sweating as he suddenly remembers Adelhide as a noblewoman. Amused, notes that although a servant should refuse, he is quite interested. Then he asked whether Jean had also shown them the kitchen. Adelhide notes the surprising absence of bad smells in the house. Notine specifies the partition toilet and asks which workshop built it. Jean pauses briefly, then admits he built it himself. The butler is stunned by the unexpected revelation. Adelhide confirms with pride that Jean renovated the house himself. Node urgently asks whether he has registered these techniques with the guild. He insists John act immediately, predicting John will make a fortune. The scene moves to John standing in a snowy forest, sensing trouble. shivering violently by a frozen lake. He says it's far too cold. He wants to make a futon for Adelhide but needs a downcoat first. Seeing horned geese, he decides to hunt them quickly and head home. Power glows in his hand as he prepares to cast a spell. Drawing his bow, he casts a silent spell to hide his attack. The arrow sailed silently through the cold air toward the geese. Something strikes one of the birds and it cries out when hit. He beams with happiness after his successful shot. Reeling in his catch, he notices something is wrong. More birds swoop in, drawn by the smell of blood. Using his transference skill, he teleports away quickly. Safely back at his manor, he is shaken by the sudden attack. Warmth from a crackling fire fills his home, a welcome comfort. By the hearth with Rish, he decides to hunt again later. A firm knock sounds at the stone manor's door. Opening it, he finds a note asking how his move is going. Adelhide is there as well, thanking Jean for helping with her renovations. She says members of the commercial guild came to see his work. No gives him a moving-in gift, a surprisingly light futon. The note says it was made from the feathers of a horned white goose. Shocked, Jean recognizes it as a priceless, top-quality item. Adelhide admits it may be too luxurious for a housewarming gift. Jean smiles sheepishly and admits he didn't realize the geese were so valuable. Adelhide invites him to dinner at her house because her kitchen is still unusable. She tells John he should come along too. Politely refuse, explaining that a butler does not dine with his master. Adelhidensis said she invited him to Genegris. We return to the timber frame houses in Kassam. A lavish dinner is served with a whole roasted goose. John says he did his best to recreate the fig tart she brought him. Note inspects the roasted goose and praises its high quality. All three offer a quiet prayer of thanks before their meal. Adelhide sinks a large, satisfying bite into the tart. Her eyes widen in surprise as she says it's delicious. Note how one savors the soup and finds the combination of flavors exquisite. Jean notices Adelhide's stern expression but knows she is enjoying the meal. He feels he is slowly starting to understand her better. He tells her she looks happy, and she agrees that good food makes her happy. Note steps forward to serve the tart but stops short when sensing danger. A small, dark, fuzzy spirit shoots out of the desert. It shoots past Jean, leaving the tart smoking on the plate. Adelhide's expression hardens the moment she senses the magic. Note's face darkens, his eyes fixed on the disturbance. Startled, she wondered what had happened so suddenly. A memory surfaces of Chris's spirits, one of which was an unknown dark entity. Adelhide believes Jean is pretending to be ignorant to test Jean's spirit abilities. Knowing he's under suspicion, Jean must bluff his way out. Smiling, he blames the temperature difference and offers to get a towel. Walking away, he leaves a pensive Adelhide watching him go. Note that the elderly butler watches with grave, silent concern. Jean considers how to deal with the fiery spirit, remembering its weakness to metal. Declaring it the punishment, he pushes the box into a pickling jar. Relieved, he puts down the special enamel container he brought from Kassam. His spirit rejoices and promises to have his favorite things ready for him later. Suddenly, a note appears behind him, calling his name and startling him. Smiling, Jean turns to the butler and asks what he needs. Notice Bose bowing deeply and apologizing that his spirit ruined the tart. Flustered, Jean Asif Adelhide knows spirits exist. Judging by the contained spirit, Jin Fine was unaware of the matter. This note explains the strict hierarchy between the main noble family and its branch families. He notices Jean's gray hair and amber eyes resemble Adelhide's. Gina is surprised and unsure whether commanding spirits is a known ability. He refuses to get involved in this family drama and decides to stay out. He seals the note telling the spirit to use the entrance next time. A mushroom spirit appears on Note's head, and he mistakes it for a pickle. Jean realizes that he and the butler now share the same secret. The deep night sky holds a sea of bright shining stars. A large ship sits at the pier of a busy port town. Arriving at the lively fish market in Port Town, Jean begins his investigation. A small white cat tries to grab a fish from a vendor's basket. He smiles, soaking up the lively, chaotic energy of the market. Spotting his sister and her friends, he remembers they misused their magic. A diagram shows how magic corrupts spirits, turning animals into monsters. He fears the hero is using magic recklessly without understanding the consequences. Nearby, he overhears local fishermen complaining that rivals are encroaching on their territory. One fisherman says their recent scuffles caused injuries. Another fisherman scoffs and says the hero and the saint are the real problem. He thinks that if a demon lord appears, they may need their help. A pickpocket attempts to steal a purse but is caught in the act. A small pouch of coins falls from the thief's hand as he is caught. Grabbing the purse, John recognizes the fleeing man as a pickpocket. Apparently, his sister's basic situation hasn't changed at all. Having seen enough, he decides to buy some seafood and head home. Snow covers the roof of his large, quiet manor house. For dinner, he prepares a beautiful feast of raw and grilled oysters. He lifts a fresh oyster to his lips, ready to enjoy it. These fresh oysters are plump and delicious, and an appraisal confirms they are safe to eat. The grilled oysters also shine with a fragrant miso aroma. He opts to preserve the leftover oysters by pickling them in oil. Noticing Rich watching him, he politely asked the spirit whether it wanted to play. Rich carefully brings his face close to his outstretched hand and sniffs it. With a disdainful puff, the spirit wolf turns its head away. He asked if Rich dislikes the smell of seafood when it backs away. Darkness falls, and he knows he must create light. With a surge of magic, the window fills with blinding light. Struck by the brightness, he cries out and shields his eyes. Determined, he plans special training for tomorrow to gain control of his magic. Deep in the snow-covered monster forest, his special training begins. A low growl alerts him to a nearby horned rabbit. Unleashing his power, he casts a swirling, devastating fireball. A fireball engulfs the horned rabbit and hurls it through the air. Defeated, the monster lies dazed on the ground, its eyes spinning. Realizing how immense his power is, he knows he must learn to control it. He refines his control by engulfing a large wolf in another fireball. Casting a wind slash, he slices cleanly through another monster rabbit. Summoning water bullets, he drenches a horned fox with magical shots. After a long night of practice, he can tell he has improved a lot. Standing over the pile of fallen monsters, he wonders if he went too far. He uses his storage skill to make a light source. The Adventurers Guild's big timber frame building stands tall. Entering the guild, he intends to check the seasonal quest requests. Determined, he decides to investigate the deepest part of the forest again. And an adventurer reports the deep forest felt unusually stirred up. Dean is worried about hunting a three-horn without an official high-paying quest. He clenches his fist to show how powerful and dangerous the three horns are. Chris steps forward and says they cannot wait for the creature to get stronger. Jean stood there, utterly bewildered by the flamboyant stranger's appearance. Jean tries to remember the name Chris because it sounds familiar. Adelhide and Node arrive carrying a large bear pelt from their hunt. With a flourish, Chris greets Adelhide and calls her the bear hunter. Chris recognizes Adelhide's foul mood but stresses the mission's importance. John recalls Dean suggested Chris would be a good partner for him. Chris leans in toward Jean and calls him a troublesome yet intriguing man. Smiling warmly, he asks who this beautiful person is and compares him to a Dark Lord. Adelhide says dryly that Genus does indeed like the Dark Lord. Chris says his name is Chris Leese and that he is a 3-star silver rank adventurer. During the handshake, Jean notices Chris's hair and eyes change color. Chris gives a knowing, confident smile as he assesses the young man before him. He extends a formal invitation to Jane to join him on the three-horn hunt. Gina was shocked to realize he had been roped into this dangerous quest. Chris formally invites the Dark Lord to join him on the hunt. Stunned, John realizes he has been pulled into the situation. Dean tries not to laugh, but Chris tells him he'll remember it. Chris admits he didn't see the beast, but he is still worried. Puffing out his chest, he says his strong intuition is at work. Dean is stunned that Chris relies only on intuition. Chris insists it's more than intuition, which only makes Dean more frustrated. Chris asked whether they should hurry or wait until spring to hunt. Note whispers to Jean, wondering why the flamboyant man has so much influence. The note says Master Chris is followed and helped by a spirit. As a revelation type, the spirit gives him premonitions and a good reputation. John knows that people who see spirits are regarded as divinely protected. This blessing provides benefits such as improved physical abilities and protection against sunburn. Dean realizes a subjugation will require 2 silver rank adventurers, including him. Chris slyly tells Dean he still owes a debt to the guild. The guild will recruit 2 iron rank adventurers for the three-horn hunt. Dean realizes they must mobilize gold rank adventurers from other cities. Chris grows serious, noting that the forest's atmosphere is not normal. A grim Adelhide identifies the foul presence as miasma. A tense silence settles over Adelhide, John, and Dean. The air is thick with unspoken questions. Dean earnestly asks John to join them on a quest into the forest in the spring. John immediately cuts him off with a quick motion, holding up a hand. Dean quickly suggests Jean be the baggage handler and run from danger. Jean admits he is curious about the state of the spirits in the forest. Agreeing to the quest leaves Dean pleasantly surprised. Ganensis Adelhides should come too, since it's better when 2 spirits listen. Dean agrees and says they will submit the request through the guild and wait until spring. A triumphant air settles over Jean. The roof and grounds are blanketed in thick snow. Sitting by the fire, Jean suspects his sister's magic is causing strange events in the forest. Deciding to check the forest again tomorrow, he resents having to clean up her mess. The caption names his destination as the deepest part of the demon forest. Entering the snowy woods, he goes to check on the spirits. He activates his ability and sees the air filled with countless faint, ethereal beings. A tiny winged fairy flutters through the shimmering air every week. Its form is unstable. A ghostly fox spirit drifts unsteadily, its essence frayed and worn. A small, dark, blob-like spirit trembles, barely holding together and about to dissipate completely. Most spirits that come to his home arrive in this tattered state, he says. A larger batwing spirit attacks a smaller, weaker one, crying out in desperation. The dark spirit bites down and absorbs the other, which disappears in a puff. The dark spirit's shadowy form begins to coalesce and grow more solid. He sees they eat each other to replace their lost essence, a sight he cannot bear. Healing alone will not work. He must create and name contracts the same way he did with Rish. With sudden resolve, he reaches out and grabs one of the dark, blob-like spirits. He studies the small creature and gives it a new identity, saying, "You are Black One." He presses another small spirit to his chest and calls it Black 2. He cradles a dark, ghostly rabbit and calls it Black 3. Holding a shadowy squirrel in his hands, he declares it Black 4. After a weary sigh, he decides he's done for the day. Naming the spirits who resist his control tires him. Bright afternoon sunlight streams through the trees as he emerges from the deep forest. He trudges through the snow toward his friend's familiar stone farmhouse. A voice at the doorway asks if he can spare a moment. The Dionio family welcomes him warmly as the children shout his name in delight. The father pulls him into a tight hug, a gesture John is still not used to. He hands out various souvenirs and says he also brought a cake. Two young boys look up at him with bright eyes and grateful smiles. Children crowd around him in a group hug, thanking him for being there. Smiling, the father accepts the gifts and says Gina is always so thoughtful. Mother Shibos thanks him and says she will cut the cake for everyone. The father, already teary over the sake, wonders what Jean has been up to. Shivas says they spend the winter by the fire, shelling beans and fixing farm tools. Jean offers help and the father gratefully accepts. Shiva returns with a smile and says the cake is sliced. The boys munch the cake and say it tastes delicious. Tina, the daughter, blushes and confidently says she will be Jean's bride. Her mother is amused, and her father firmly insists he will not allow it. The father protests that Tina promised she would be his bride when she grew up. He demands to know what John dislikes about his daughter, leaving John confused. Cheerfully, the two boys announce they will be John's brides instead. They lunged at the bewildered Jen and trapped him in another tight hug. A dark, determined look crosses the father's face. Lunging into the hug, he shouts that he's coming too. Tina and her mother laughed happily as they watched the chaotic scene. John remembers how warm a normal family felt, so different from his. Winter passes quickly, and when spring arrives, it is time to leave. A flamboyant voice introduces the wise man, Chris. Chris greets Adelhide, who doesn't look thrilled with his new nickname for her. Grizzled adventurer Retzi formally introduces himself to the party. Retz warns John to be careful because Chris is in charge of their battle plans. Dean admits he's worried about taking the inexperienced Jean on the hunt. Both Adelhide and Chris agree with this sentiment. Dean asks whether the famous new bear hunter could be Adelhide. Jean realizes he hasn't visited the guild lately to log his accomplishments. Chris laughs, finally understanding the situation as the pieces fall into place. Jean wonders whether the spirit's favor explains why Chris insisted he come. Chris confirms his spirit has been telling him about Jean for some time. Perched on Chris's shoulder, a tiny winged fairy admires his handsome face. Kaina, a young woman, formally introduces herself to the group. Kaina bows thanks Jean for his past help and tells him not to worry. Shyly, she asks if he can share the specifications of his pack when they return. She gives him an ornate bottle, a guild gift, to keep him safe. The party leaves town and heads into the deep forest. Dean comments on James's impressive leather pack and asks about the roll on top. Jean says he made the futon himself, which surprises his companion. Adelhide and Dean doubt its practicality and worry it will be heavy and bulky. Jean demonstrates the quick-release buckle on his chest strap to make removal easy. Chris thinks his party's luggage is likely more of a nuisance. Even his own companion swoons at his serious expression, which Jean finds ridiculous. The party moves in a tight formation as they press deeper into the woods. Chris moves with athletic grace, his senses sharp and alert. Reddy moves ahead while a small fox keeps pace with him on a tree branch. The Red Sea signals it's time to set up camp for the day. They made good time in the clear weather and set up camp by a stream. Jean reaches into his seemingly bottomless pack and pulls out a heavy cast-iron Dutch oven. Lighting a fire, he starts cooking a stew with dried chicken and vegetables. The stew reaches a rolling boil, which means the meal is ready. Pulling a cloth rat bundle from his bag, he gets ready for another surprise. He opens a box filled with perfectly made pork cutlet sandwiches and fried chicken. Chewing thoughtfully, Dean says Jean's lunch looks delicious. Immediately, everyone reaches for the box of sandwiches. Chris takes a bite and is struck by how soft the bread is. Red Sea and Dean agree the meat is delicious, but they prefer firmer bread. While examining the cutlet, ask whether the coating is breadcrumbs. Walking through the process, Jean points out that making the oyster sauce is the hardest part. Adelhide tastes a piece of fried chicken and recognizes it as chicken. Jean lists the marinade ingredients: salt, pepper, garlic, ginger, fish sauce, and brandy. After a satisfying meal, the party gets ready to move on. The adventurer's boots move steadily along the grassy forest path. Jean sees his boots covered in mud and much dirtier than everyone else's. Jean admires the butler, noting his perfectly polished shoes that stay spotless even on the trail. Chris warns there are many wolves ahead, and Jean decides to mimic his graceful movements. Chris smiles and says that although weaker than bears, wolves hunt in dangerous packs. Alerted by the warning, Jean and Adelhide prepared for the coming threat. Jean notes that Chris can be irritating at times, but is also very attentive and caring. A pack of snarling wolves bursts from the trees, low growls announcing their arrival. Redson. Chris spun and drew their weapons to face the approaching wolf pack. Jean is surprised when the wolves completely ignore the others and leap straight at him. Retz shouts his name in alarm, but Jean winks and says they must think he's the weakest. John plants his foot firmly on the grass, bracing for the attack. Springing forward, he hoists his massive decapitation sword high and drives it down in a devastating swing. Jean focuses intently as he prepares to unleash the full power of his blade. With one fluid motion, Jean's sword sweeps through the wolf pack, felling them instantly. Retzi stares, mouth open, stunned by June's incredible display of strength. Chris's eyes sparkle with delight as he theatrically dubs Jean Yu of the dark arts. Gushing, Chris thinks it's wonderful that June appears vulnerable but isn't. John quietly disagrees. Dean admits he was wrong about his first impression, and Retzi's confidence falters under the newcomer's power. Note wisely urges them to move on before the scent of blood draws in more dangerous creatures. Dean agrees at once and urges the group to leave the area right away. Leaving the swift battle behind, the group heads deeper into the forest. Chapter 12's title page appears, noting the choice of comfort over rebellion. At their new campsite, Jean starts setting up a simple, practical A-frame 10. Kneeling before his handiwork, he decides this simple shelter will do. Red Sea watches skeptically and asks whether Jean is being careless with his setup. Chris figures out that a waterproof sheet makes a simple roof and walls possible. With his arms spread wide, he praises John's wonderful creation and steps in for a hug. Jean remembers the 2 months he spent surviving alone on a deserted island. Adelhide helps, arranging a bed of soft moss to serve as a cushion. Chris says that with everyone getting their bedding ready, it feels like a Japanese mountain camp. Jean says he and the others will go fishing for dinner. He decides to make soup for everyone, an idea he gratefully welcomes on the cold night. A large pot of stew packed with meat and vegetables bubbles over the campfire. Jean stirs from the pot, announces a tomato soup with dried meat and plenty of vegetables. Dean rubs his head, puzzled as if he's forgotten something important. He remembers seeing Jean slap dough earlier and wonders if it was a strange ritual. Dean is still puzzled by the memory of June's strange actions that looked ceremonial. The finished ball of dough rests on a rock, perfectly smooth and ready to use. Jean sets the dough aside to rest, planning to use it for tomorrow's breakfast as well. A wide view of the starry night sky is visible through a break in the dark forest canopy. The campfire meal is ready, with a big pot of soup, grilled fish, and a mysterious pizza. Chris asks about the unfamiliar dish. Jean explains it's a pizza with bacon and asparagus. Chris looks confused and admits he's never heard of a food called pizza. Still bewildered, Dean asks John to explain the strange dough-slapping ritual from earlier. Someone lifts a pizza slice and the melted cheese stretches into a long, gooey string. Dean takes a big bite, his eyes widening as he says it's incredibly delicious. Note praises the seasoning, and Jean says it would also pair well with tomato sauce. The butler looks up in surprise and asks if Jean has any tomato sauce. Jean suddenly realizes he has never seen a fresh tomato in this world. Adelhide compliments the tasty soup, and Jean says he just used some dried tomatoes. Gently, Chris plucks a stray leaf from Jean's collar. His lament that John would have made a fine bride draws a loud protest from John. Dean asks Jean what his type is and playfully puffs out his chest as an example. Jean thinks Adelhide is rather flat-chested, which makes her blush with embarrassment. The butler note looks worn out and upset by the chaotic dinner conversation. Retsu asks whether John distrusts people, and John admits he's still learning how to interact with them. He remembers being surrounded by untrustworthy people and becoming the target of pranks. In Thought Bubbles, Red Sea and Chris Wonder discuss the nature of these pranks. Dean says getting teased after confessing was probably embarrassing for him. Jean says it happened on 3 separate occasions with girls of different ages. Dean is stunned, saying being cursed 3 times is hard to believe. Retz carefully suggests that June's unique experiences have simply made him more self-aware. Jean knows the truth. His older sister's manipulation caused all his problems. He remembers that his sister had clearly been behind all 3 incidents and had used her friends. Treated like property and teased, he learned to act like he didn't care. Chris Patz notices John's shoulder has cheered up. Jean thanks him. Silently, Adelhide watches Jean with a deep, unreadable seriousness. Camera pans up through the dark trees to the starry night sky above the forest. Alone by the crackling campfire, Jean sips from a warm mug. Gazing into the dark, he thought about how cold the nights have become. Even in spring, a small bird spirit flutters down to land on his shoulder, and he greets it. An off-panel voice announces it's time to change the night watch guard. Adelhide steps up into the campfire to take over John's watch. She offers him a Florentine cookie as a snack and thanks him for his many kindnesses. Showing off the new coat he gave her, she notes how light and comfortable it feels. Shyly, she explained she had written the code herself to repay him for the potion he gave her. His quiet expression makes her worry that he didn't like the cookie she offered him. Softly, she tells him he is a good man who deserves happiness. Surprised, Jean thanks her and dismisses his past troubles as mere coincidence. Looking at her, he realizes she is trying to offer him genuine comfort and encouragement. He says his distrust is easing after meeting good people, and she asks if that's true. Adelhide meets his gaze and says she would be happy to be counted among those good people. Flustered, Jung confirms she is one of them. Rising, he tells her she can take the rest of the watch. Adelhide nibbles her cookie, finding Jean's directness both embarrassing and refreshing. Blushing, she realizes he is nothing like her manipulative, two-faced sister. Jean smiles quietly to himself, thinking they should all get a good night's rest for tomorrow. Elsewhere, Retzi and Dean pick at the roasted game and wish they had strong liquor to wash it down. Retz agrees, saying the food they're eating is better than what he gets in town. A few days later, the party sits around the campfire, still without their main quarry. Adelhide closes her eyes and identifies the spiced wine as Redoveni. The tasting note confirms her assessment, noting ripe berries, pepper, and spice. Jean watches, surprised, never having heard of a wine with that name before. Holding up a fresh roll, Chris is impressed that bread can be cooked in a pot. Warm bread in a bowl sits beside a dish of liver paste, a simple camp meal. Jean thinks about how important it is to get enough iron and vitamins on a long journey. Chris points at Jean's odd conical tent and asks if Jean plans to sleep in it. Jean explains it's not for sleeping, but a makeshift steam bath he built. He explains to curious Chris how he used branches to build a dome frame. A fire in the tent warms a carefully arranged pile of smooth river stones. John demonstrates this process by ladling water onto hot stones, which hiss and release steam. Jean pours water over hot stones while Chris watches in amazement. He imagines how refreshing a jump into the river would be now. Chris calls, and Jean turns to the adventurer. With a flourish, Chris prays John's provided remarkable comfort in the wild. Jean offers him the use of the sauna, and Chris accepts gratefully. The rest of the party has gathered to join the surprise. He gestures toward the sauna and asks if everyone else wants to use it too. The other party members readily agree to take a relaxing bath. Later, Jane hangs a sheet to dry and notices the things they put off for fun. Leaving the river, he trails a thick, dark drop that falls to the ground. He stands in a clearing surrounded by small, dark spirits. Knowing he must name them, he fears being discovered. The morning sky can be seen through the thick forest canopy overhead. The next day, the group presses deeper into the woods. Relaxed after the bath, Dean feels great as Chris notices their quick pace. Dean's cheerful expression snaps into a sharp, focused look. Calling for the others to wait, he rushes ahead of Jean. A huge three-horned lizard called an udikeg blocks their path. Dean is shocked because he had expected a two-horn at most in this area. Quietly, Retzi tells Joan to hold his position and wait for the signal. Their only chance to strike comes when it raises its head, he says. Dean says they'll split up, and Chris agrees calmly. Stepping firmly forward, Dean readies himself to charge the powerful monster. Adelhide braces herself as the huge lizard lumbers through the forest. Dean grits clenched his teeth, and his expression showed pure determination. He throws his weight into the creature, knocking it off balance. Dean yells for Chris to make his move as the beast stumbles. Without hesitation, Chris lunges forward, his sword already coming down in an arc. The blade sinks deep into the monster's throat. Chris stands over the fallen beast with a calm, victorious expression. Adelhide praises their magnificent teamwork, and despite having no degrees, it was impressive. Retz reassures John, saying he knows John is a cautious person. John tells himself he never could have managed that on his own. Retzi is certain it was a three-horned animal that got out of the cage. The other adventurer is shocked, because usually only one horn is superior. John is stunned by how vast the forest is. Dean breathed a sigh of relief and said their objective is now complete. Letzi suggests they make camp for the night, and Dean agrees. Chris turns to Jean and asks him to help butcher their prize. At the river, John and Retzi start the grim task of dismantling the carcass. Retz watches with admiration, praising Jones's butchering skills. John Demure says his self-taught style comes from hunting practice. Glancing aside, he thought about the other strange thing he had noticed. He notices another larger group of dark spirits gathered nearby. He wonders whether larger spirits become monsters with more horns. Jean asked Rhett how much lard they had left for cooking. Retzi says they have plenty, so Jean goes to pick some asparagus. Red warns him not to wander too far from the safety of the fire. Jean spots a few mushrooms and garlic mustard plants still growing in late winter. He uses his exploration skill one last time. A power lights his eye as he activates the skill and scans the area. Startled, he sensed a fox nearby moving in quickly. Realizing it's two-horned, he sees it heading straight for them. He must warn Redzi about the approaching monster right away. Running back to camp, he shouts that a fox monster is nearby. Redzi says he used cedar leaves to try to mask their scent. Handing Gianna a small jar of ointment, he hides their smell. Fox appears in a blur and races toward Joan at incredible speed. Redzi is surprised but thinks this fight will be easier than the Udokage. The fox's paws pound the ground as it quickly closes the distance. A drill drips from the creature's maw as it prepares to strike. Retzi shouts Jones's name and warns him as the fox looms over him. Jean draws his sword and readies himself to face the massive beast alone. As the fox leaps, Retzi screams Jones's name in alarm. Jean braces for the attack, his face grim and determined. The fox drops to the ground in front of him and whimpers softly. Betsy stares, completely confused by the strange turn of events. Amazed, Dean asks if Jean took down the two-horn by himself. Chris steps forward and dramatically addresses Jean with a respectful title. Grabbing June's hands, he says excitedly that June is a rising star. Node and Adelhide simply say they're relieved he's unharmed. Dean watches the twitching fox, still amazed by Jean's power. He admits he thought they were just supposed to hunt lizards. He says lizards stay close by, but foxes roam farther. Chris says a two-horn usually means a three-horn is nearby. Listening, Jean realizes the fox's presence is dangerous. Dean decides not to linger and will head back in the morning. That night, meatballs sizzle in a big pot over the campfire. Dean teases as Jean asks whether he enjoyed the fried chicken that much. The group enjoys a hearty pasta dinner and comments on its distinctive flavor. Bright sun lights their way as they set out for home the next day. The group makes their way back through the forest without any more trouble. Chris and Dean move together, alert and ready for anything. At last, they return to the town's stone gates. A guild representative greets them and thanks them for their work. John sighs inwardly, dreading the debriefing with the guild leaders. He quickly asked Adelhide for a note to collect his reward on his behalf. He tells them to go home and prepare a hot bath for him. Dean looks confused and asks if Jean is already leaving them. Relenting, he insists that John tell him everything about the spirits later. Jean returns to the quiet street where his rented house sits. Sighing with exhaustion, he adds more logs to the fireplace. Tiny fire spirits inside a salamander play happily in the hearth. He asks a fairy-like spirit to carry messages between his homes. Tapping his storage skill, he instantly fills the bathtub with hot water. He tells the spirits to keep the bath warm for his friends. Activating his skill transfer, he gets ready to leave for his manor. Arriving at his true home, he calls for his companion Rish. The little spirit wolf leaps happily into his open arms. Patting the happy wolf, he suggests a bath before they play. Adelhide sinks into the warm bath and breathes a soft sigh of relief. By the fire, John sits thinking he needed to wash 3 times to get clean. A small winged spirit flutters into the room, and John thanks it for coming. Telling the spirit to wait, he uses his transference skill to teleport. He returns to the bathroom to drain the now lukewarm water. Fresh, steaming hot water splashes and refills the elegant, claw-footed tub. Jean writes a note to Adelhide, greeting them, apologizing for the wait, and inviting them inside. Note hands him a heavy pouch of money, and John accepts it gratefully. He tells them the bath is ready and thanks them for preparing it. Holding a wooden bucket tells Adelhide that everything is ready for her. Jean has served a drink and some cheese toast, which he accepts with a brief word of thanks. He asked where he could possibly have found such a fine bathtub. The note says it's a rare import that will take 6 months to order. Jean worries the fine pottery might make others think he is of noble birth. A note asks to buy the robe for Jinlin Adelheim, but Jin says it was a gift. The butler's face grows serious as he prepares to report his findings. He announces that he and Adelhide will join the subjugation party. Jean dreads another trip into the forest, while Note insists he cannot accept the robe for free. Flustered, Jean raises his hands and tries to refuse the pouch of money. An intense, unyielding gaze forced a nervous John to accept the payment. Adelhide steps out of the bath, her long, damp hair drawing attention. Jean tells her to have some tea while he gets the next bath ready, but she offers to help. Smiling, he tells her to rest because an attendant cannot let their master do that work. Note steps away carrying a basket of used towels and other items. Jean brings a tray of drinks to Adelhide and tells her to take her time. This is the first time he has ever seen her with her hair down. Adelhide feels a strange tension with her bird spirit resting on her head. Suddenly her mood darkens and her face settles into a familiar brooding scowl. Jean sees that she looks like an assassin again and asks her what is wrong. When she asked if he had seen the spirits in the forest, he confirmed he had. She hasn't seen spirits like that since a court mage went berserk, she says. She remembers seeing Jin walk among the dark, corrupted spirits he found. Jean asks what using magic is usually like, because he has rarely seen it. She explains that spirits willingly lend a small portion of their power through contracts. John realizes the melted, shadowy spirits he saw were being destroyed by forced magic. She confirms that their dark forms prove their resentment and that it corrupts everyone around them. He asked whether the magic users themselves eventually become monsters, and she confirms that they do. With a grim smile, Jean thinks his sister is becoming a demon lord, not a hero. Adelhide explains that using magic properly strengthens and stabilizes the spirits. She says spirits will willingly lend their power if they are not forced. Her face falls as she says she's lucky he was never corrupted and is still with her. She finds herself comparing her spirit to the tormented souls they saw. She asked John whether the spirits he had seen were corrupted by people. Shayna stands up abruptly and tells her to wait, leaving her confused. He returns with a warm smile and says he's back. While presenting a tray, he asks her to keep it secret from the butler. A beautiful assortment of cakes and pastries fills the platter for her to enjoy. Adelhide gazes at the unfamiliar desserts with pure wonder. Not sure she'd like them, he still wanted her to try. He reminds her she should remember the spirits, but staying depressed is not healthy. Moved by his kindness, Adelhide gratefully accepts the offering. A bite of the cream puff makes her face light up with surprised delight. John offers her tea and asks if she is enjoying the sweet tea he brought. Lifting her fork, she takes a thoughtful bite of the strawberry shortcake. Her eyes widen as the delicious flavor hits, pure bliss on her face. Although she's had apple tart before, this one is on a completely different level. Pointing at a strawberry, she asked him what the small red fruit was. He remembers how worried he felt serving unfamiliar food to a noblewoman. Smiling, he thinks that although he's not good at comforting people, sweets seem to help. Adelhide agrees she liked it, a happy, content smile on her face. A calm sip of tea erases her earlier melancholy. She embodies sighs and contentment and admits she never realized she was such a simple person. Jean tells her that her spirit seems much happier now too. Adelhide looks at it with a gentle smile and asks the small bird if that is true. Jean watches them both, sharing their quiet, happy moment. Outside the building, he notices that his lady seems much better. A large, timber-framed building dominates the scene, and it's where they are staying. Jean, now wearing his traveling cloak, is stopped by the veteran adventurer Retsum. Retz asked John to make him a bag and offered to pay for it. Jean notes that Dean and Chris have also asked him for bags. Retzi warns him that carrying anything too flashy is likely to be stolen. While being measured, Retzi says the next quest is mandatory for silver rank adventurers. Jean doesn't understand why they can't just earn stars by doing ordinary subjugation quests. Red Sea explains that stars are like contributions, and people with bad reputations can still earn them. That means they don't know what kind of unsavory people will show up for the quest. The charge records the adventurer ranks, with Jean and Adelhide at copper and Chris at silver. Jean discovers that Adelhide can join through Chris's recommendation, but he will not be going himself. Retz playfully grabs Jean and asks when the quest starts, since Jean is acting smug. Jean says it will be in about a month, depending on when Amadeo arrives in town. Reddy confirms Amadeo is a gold rank adventurer summoned by the guild for the quest. Intrigued by reports that Amadeo is a powerful mage, John wants to see him in action. Reddy says the guild believes Amadeo can handle any powerful monsters that appear. Curiosity piqued by the news about the powerful mage, he joined us with another question. Leaning in, Retzi reveals that Amadeo can also see spirits. That night, Jean goes alone into the spirit-filled forest of monsters. He will hunt lizards and use their hides to make bags for everyone. From the dark undergrowth, a small, shadowy spirit drifts toward him. With practice, Jean can plug the corrupted spirit right out of the air. Holding a small creature, he calmly names it Black 95. Releasing the now stabilized spirit, he resolves to catch them to ease Adelhide's mind. Gazing at the glowing forest, he knows he'll be very busy again. Jean walks through the town streets while the new chapter title appears. Meeting Adelhide. Note: he apologizes for keeping them waiting. Handing over the new bags he made, he says he has finished their request. The key point is the payment, but Jean casually tells him he can pay later. Noting that his skill made the bags easy, he wonders whether it is too early to go shopping. Adelhide says the quest is still some time away, but the number of outsiders is growing. Sean sees that Retzi was right about the rude adventurers gathering in town. A large timber frame building stands against a clear, dotted sky. Two thugs cut them off, commenting on Jean's pretty face and demanding his money. Retzi asks Jane why he's being targeted and tells him to deal with it. An invisible force hurls Retzi backward, and she cries out in surprise. Chris looks over his shoulder and asks if Gina is all right, and she simply nods. Flamboyant Chris was annoyed that the others snuck in without an invitation. Jean stands over the defeated man and notes his bravery as the man mumbles about the black bear. The butler's notes suggest they all go to a nearby restaurant to celebrate their reunion. Several hands lifted wooden cups high, joining in a hearty toast. John asks his companions what they've been up to since they last met. Retz says he was helping Chris gather herbs and had to slip away for a while. Admitting he left early, he says he can't judge, and Jean then asks about Dean. Surprised, Adelhide asks if Dean is looking for a new place and planning to move out. Dean explains that since he moved out, he has relied on his mother to help with his sister Emile's chores. Jean listens closely, realizing the guild is training Dean to keep him away from his sister. Playing Ash, Adelhide is on a bear hunting mission, Cooley says. Jean finds her unshakable. With his cup in hand, June suddenly realizes what he's been hearing. He tells Dean he feels like he's being called Black Bear. Dean confirms that's true. Adelhide notes that Ash and Bear are a strong combination. The ad's gene is often found with her. Jean quietly thinks he would have preferred the nickname Wolf. Chris Swoon dramatically agrees that Bear does not suit Jean's elegant, iris-like beauty. Red Sea drinks deeply from his cup, then shares his own thoughts on the matter. He declares with pride that the name Wolf belongs to the feared Wolf King Valmoa. John repeats the name Valmoa, and Chris confirms he was a legendary adventurer. An image of the cloaked Valmoa appears while Dean explains he was the legend's disciple. Blushing, Dean admits his simple admiration for Valmoa is the reason he became an adventurer. Jean smiles, shifts the subject while holding up a book. Giving his friends custom scabbards, he thanks them for their help. Dean accepts the gift and peers inside the new scabbard with curiosity. Noting the interior is leather-lined, he wonders if it's worth the price. Adelhide dismisses the no-doffers payment and focuses only on bringing them home safely. She makes a grand promise of a feast with a whole roasted cow. Join us as we stand stunned by the offer. Others in the tavern eagerly ask to join the after-mission celebration. Jean raises his cup again and wishes everyone a safe return from the upcoming quest. That night the scene shifts to the tavern, smoke curling from its chimney into the stories guy. Jean's group begins packing up while Chris and Retzi opt to stay for another drink. John is surprised to see Retzi heading the same way, and Retzi says he rents a cheap room nearby. Retz complains that a big shot is renovating toilets and raising his rent. Ashamed, Jean turns away as Note and Adelhide stare, realizing he is the big shot. Note says the new toilets make old smells unbearable, and Jean thinks it might be missionary work. A brilliant sunrise over the distant mountains marks the start of a new day. True to form, Jean wakes with a yawn while Rish sleeps peacefully in a nearby basket. After a quiet breakfast, he decides to head deep into the forest again today. A shimmer of energy surrounds Jin as he uses transference to teleport into the woods. A swarm of flickering black spirits waits as he begins his daily task of saving them. He starts the long process of naming them, quietly repeating the word black again and again. He exhales, feeling he's made good progress. A lone spirit drifts near his hand. Knowing the subjugation force will pass soon, he wants to see Amadeo use his magic. He strikes a deal with a tiny forest fairy to serve as his scout. Plan set, he decides to spend the day a little deeper in the woods. He remembers a God-given map pointing to a forest to the east where their power does not reach. At the edge of unknown territory, he steels himself and steps forward. Heavy footfalls crushing the undergrowth signal that a large creature is approaching. A monstrous wild boar with 3 sharp horns on its snout charges out of the trees. Jean nimbly dodges the attack and identifies the creature as a 3-horn boar. Summoning his decapitation sword, magical energy swirls around his outstretched hand. A swift, decisive slash cuts down the monstrous beast. Using his storage skill, the boar's massive carcass disappears. Turning, he notices some unusual plants growing nearby. Recognizing them as wild asparagus, he plans to cook them later. With a smile, he plugs a few stalks, planning to share some with Ash and the others. Crouching, he looks up at a new presence, curious what it is. A beautiful Yuki hue, a single-horned snow leopard, pads silently out of the forest. A mythical beast makes a soft, plaintive sound while holding a paw to its mouth. Jean's eyes widen in utter shock at the sight of the legendary creature. Stammering, he tries to process what he sees and correctly identifies it as a Yuki hue. Another soft sound comes from the creature, clearly trying to tell him something. Watching the Yuki hue closely, Jean tries to understand what it means. Suddenly, a voice echoes in his mind, telling him the creature wants something. A majestic white stag appears, translating Yuki Hughes' plea to help Majaru inform a contract. Gina is stunned when the second creature appears and translates for the first. He tries to identify these creatures and wonders whether the Yuki Hu is a spirit. The Yuki Hu says it is a holy beast. It is horned, pure, and free of dark miasma. Jean asks about Majiru, and the white stag explains that Majiru is its dear friend. Realizing Majaru is turning into a black spirit, he knows he must help. The creatures offered him a reward. They'll build a sanctuary wherever he chooses. They describe the sanctuary as a safe haven that repels all monsters and dark spirits. John realizes a base in the forest would be ideal for his work naming spirits. After accepting their terms, he asks where to go, and the Yuki Hue tells him to ride the deer. Leaping onto the stag's back, he grips its antlers and says he's ready. A powerful hoof drives into the earth as the stag gathers for a sudden burst forward. Gina is thrown back by a sudden, whiplash-inducing burst of speed. Jean yells at the stag for moving so suddenly as the world blurs past. Clinging tightly to the antlers, he is amazed and terrified by the incredible speed. The stag's hooves dig into the ground and it comes to a sudden, jarring stop. Momentum carries Jean forward, throwing him off the stags and back onto the grass. Dizzy and annoyed, he sits up and yells at the creature for stopping without warning. The Yuki Hu calmly tells him that Majiru, the spirit horse, has arrived. A proud dark horse with a mane and tail of ghostly black flames enters the clearing. The horse glares down at him and angrily demands to know why a human was brought here. Jean studies the creature and concludes it must be Majiru. He notes the horse's corruption is advanced, its shoulder already fading into shadow. Meeting the proud spirit's gaze, he asked its name to begin the contract. He knows that a spirit's name grows stronger when it forms a new bond. Scoffing at the idea, Majiru refuses to make a contract with a mere human. Jean considers how to persuade the stubborn spirit and thinks magic circles might be needed. He forgoes magic and takes a more direct approach. Showing remarkable strength, John lunges forward and brings the massive horse down. Calmly, he tells the stunned spirit not to be afraid and asks its name. Covering its face with its paw, the Yuki Hue finds Jane's methods cruel. Completely overwhelmed and terrified, Majora Sweats is shaken by the human's unexpected power. John kneels over the defeated spirit, gently but firmly asking what its name is. Deep in the forest, Jean whispers Maharu's name while preparing to forge a new contract. Alone in the dense foliage, he keeps saying he wants to form a bond. A soft glow suddenly appears in his hand as he gasps in surprise. Clutching his chest, he says his magic was drained, but the contract succeeded. The majestic stag dryly comments on his hard struggle, annoying the leopard. Jean asks the spirits if they know of a beautiful place where others like them can gather. The white stag lowers its head, clearly inviting Jean to climb onto its back. Majiru, the spirit horse, remarks on the human's boldness in riding the stag. Riding the stag, Janice was surprised at how comfortable the ride felt. Without warning, the stag bolts, leaving Jan clinging on in wide-eyed panic. They move so fast, the forest turns into a dizzy blur. The ride stops suddenly, sending Jane tumbling face first into the undergrowth. Posing as the stag, he casually asks how the new location suits him. John's face lights up as he looks around, and the clearing is much better than he expected. The two mystical creatures say they will now form a protective barrier. With its eyes closed, the horn leopard hums as it draws on a powerful energy. Shimmering magic spreads outward in a wave, filling the entire clearing. A vast translucent dome now surrounds the sanctuary, isolating it from the outside world. Jean fears the barrier could stop his new horse spirit from getting in. The Stagria assures him that his contract will let Majuru pass through freely. With their tasks complete, the spirit bids them farewell and thanks them for their help. A brilliant flash of light made the two majestic guardians of the forest disappear. Left alone, John is in the calm of his new haven. He pulls out his map and notices a change that makes him pause, intrigued. To his surprise, a new location has been added to the parchment. Now he wonders whether the map shows Majaru's range instead of just the places he visited. A warm blush of pure joy crosses his face as he imagines finishing the map. By the calm pool, he thinks about how to make the most of his new sanctuary. The scene shifts to the bustling commercial city of Narua set by the sea. Arriving in the city, Jean plans to study its architecture for his own projects. Pausing, he admires an ornate window made of many circular glass panes. Narrowing his gaze, he activates his powerful appraisal skill to learn more. His skill shows the glasses are high quality with superior clarity. It reminded him of the crude, bubbly glass he had seen in the town of Kassam. Inside the shop, the fine parchment and the intricately carved boxes catch his eye. He admires a display of elegant dresses and sparkling accessories. Picking up a beautiful red goblet, he decides to buy it despite the expected cost. Upon entering Pothacary, he wonders about the state of medicine in this world. Eyes wide with shock, he spots a large bin of cacao beans. The shopkeeper sells it as a medicine for youth, but John knows it must be bitter. The man says nobles drink it with milk and sugar and its price is rising. Jean's face falls when he realizes the beans are extremely expensive. Although the price is shocking, his desire for a taste of home wins out and he buys them. He notes the beans need complex processing, which makes them more valuable. A smile crosses his face as he learns about the gourmet side of this new world. Someone calls out, gesturing toward the young man with black hair. A distinguished elderly man with a cane looks at him and praises his appearance. For a moment, Jean feels flustered, uncertain whether the old man is flirting with him. Steadying himself, he politely asks if the gentleman needs anything. The man says he was admiring Jones's backpack, a new model from the Agir Guild. The old gentleman says thoughtfully that the town of Agir is quite far away. Jean thinks about the region's snowy mountains and considers that he could make better gear himself. Apologizing for stopping him, the man gives a friendly wave goodbye. Jean Sweats realizes this is the 10th time a stranger has approached him. He hopes a merchant will come to buy so he can promote his toilet design. After seeing the sights, he decides it's time to pursue his main objective. In the general store, he asks a woman what she's been looking for. He clarifies that his quest is to find a book about spirits. A client requests a rare text that explains how to capture spirits. A serious young man steps forward and says those books are not for public sale. He says if a book like that exists, it would be found here and sold illegally. Jean considers looking for the book in a shady antique shop. The old woman tells him a proper bookstore is a more likely place to look. He asks her politely for directions to a bookstore that might have what he needs. A small bell chimes as he steps into the shop. The clerk asks if he is looking for decorative books and offers 2 types. The clerk says one type is just a hollow box for holding trinkets. Jean wants a genuinely readable book that is also decorative. The clerk offers 2 books, one with blank pages and the other a prank book. He points out the blank book is pricier because you can write in it. Narrowing his eyes, Jean activates his skill and sees the magic inside the books. He notices a tiny fairy on the prank book, and its text keeps rewriting itself. Startled, the little spirit pulls his hand back as it nears the book's cover. The clerk says the prank book is written in a script that only its owner can read. Jean knows its purpose is to keep secrets, especially about magic and curses. Deciphering this text without the key would be extremely difficult, he believes. He suddenly realizes there must be a second book that matches it. Holding the two books together, he correctly guesses they are a matching set. Despite the clerk's warning that the set is expensive, Jean cheerfully agrees to buy it. Thanking the clerk for his help, he leaves the store with his valuable purchase. Overjoyed, he discovers the books are spirit-bound originals, not mere copies. Having completed his mission and spent his money, he prepares to leave the city. That evening, he reads by the fire in his usual way, his spirit wolf Rish sleeping nearby. He discovers that spirit contract risks depend on compatibility and magical power. The book says contracts let people summon spirits to places where they do not belong. He weighs the steep energy cost of calling a fire spirit to a snowy mountain. He observes that spirits are everywhere, but their individual natures vary greatly. He recalls the goddesses Misha and Haralfa, both light spirits but very different. He remembers, with comic timing, the powerless orb of light insisting its failure wasn't its fault. He admits he rarely listens to the requests of his house spirits. At dawn, the sun rises, bathing his peaceful estate in warm light. Magnificent breakfast platters are laid out, piled high with meats and fresh croissants. His guest Adelhide eats with her eyes closed, clearly in pure bliss. Her butler's note says a warm, tasty breakfast is a wonderful thing. Jean smiles, explains he cooked all the perishables before they leave on their quest. Hot breakfasts are rare in this world of cold, simple meals, he says. The note asks whether Adelhide's noble household also skips cooking in the morning. Jean says most people work at sunrise, so saving firewood is common. The meal is over and the clean plate shows they were completely satisfied. She will say it's almost time to leave and ask his friends to wait a moment. Adelhide and her butler notice Jean approaching and watch in confusion. He hands over a large, heavy bundle that Adelhide takes with some effort. Jean smiles and explains it's loaded with supplies for Dean's party, too. A final wave sees them off as they thank him and leave. Alone now, John announces his next task, to get his own building materials. Carefully inspecting a stack of sturdy, well-made bricks, he prepares for his new project. Then he studies several beautifully ornate patterned tiles with care. Jean talks with a friendly blonde shopkeeper about his plans and purchases. Back at his manor, Rich happily says he can join Jean in the new safe zone. A fluffy spirit wolf bounces around Jones's feet in a joyful circle. Grabbing the excited Rish, Jean decides to take him along when he teleports. They reach a sunlit meadow, his boots pressing into the soft green grass. Holding Rish, Jean sees a tiny, glowing spirit flitting through the air. When they arrive, the nearby spirits all scatter in panic. John wonders why they fled and asks Rish whether he startled them. Gently setting Rish down, he reassures him it's safe to play inside the white line. Pulling a shovel from his magical storage, he thinks it's time to begin. Driving the shovel's blade deep into the earth, he prepares to start construction. He's planning to build a small 2-story house right here in this clearing. A cozy second floor where he can relax after a long day is what he imagines. He will build a large garden where Rish can play while he works. He's already spent days collecting plaster, wood, and bricks for the fireplace. Tired from hard work, he leans on his shovel and decides to take a break. Smiling, he calls to Rish, who is happily exploring the new space. Rich drinks eagerly from the cool water in the bowl, Join provided. Jean has made himself a delicious-looking bagel sandwich for lunch. Seated at a small rustic table, he savors his meal in the quiet clearing. Meanwhile, Rich finds a sturdy stick and sniffs it with keen interest. Settling down to chew his prize, he is completely content with his find. John imagines planting a vibrant garden and building a coffee siphon. His quiet lunch is interrupted by an unexpected guest. A magnificent horned snow leopard called a Yuki Hue pads into view without a sound. A majestic white stag with gleaming silvery antlers soon follows. A powerful dark lead horse then joins the procession of magical beasts. Jean is taken aback by the sudden appearance of the third creature. 3 animals stare with solemn intensity. They fix their gaze on Rich. A voice echoes in Jean's mind, asking why the great Lord Rish is here. She nearly choked, stunned to hear his small companion addressed so reverently. The creatures stand in awe, wondering how their lord came to be here. "Lord Rish," John says again, his mind reeling with confusion. The animals remember their lord disappearing 5 years ago when a summoning failed. John ties their story to his own arrival, the timeline matching perfectly. Turning to his companion, he asks, Rich, were you the boss at Yuki Hughes? Rich tilts his head, the stick in his mouth making him look completely clueless. John concludes Rich either has amnesia or just doesn't care, so he drops it. He's still amazed that Rich knows these powerful beings. Looking at the pristine wilderness, he thinks this forest might have been Rish's old home. When Rish chooses his coat, Jean agrees that a forest suits a wolf. The stag keeps praising itself and says it is richer and more powerful than any other spirit. The horse says Rish is freer than any of his kind. The Yuki Hugh concludes that Rish's voice can reach the world's end. A bit annoyed, Jean notes that the Yuki Hugh has been praising Rish non-stop. He tries to return to work, but the creatures bring up a title. It puzzles him to hear them call Rish the Apostle of the Wind. Proudly, Rich shows Jean the measuring tape he found. Jean recalls what the creatures said about past events. He knows a barrier protects his house, keeping it isolated from the world. He wonders whether Rish's title is linked to the forest location. He asks the creatures to explain what they mean by a puzzle of the wind. The stag reveals that Rish was involved with the hero of the previous generation. Is Jean Gross angry and assuming the former hero damaged the forest? The stag explains the hero built a vessel that could travel on water. John realizes they mean a ship, a gift given to the city of Manhwa in the film. Suddenly he worries Rish might hate him for using the same powers. Crouching, he feels dejected and worried about how Rish might judge him. Rish rolls over, demanding a belly rub and putting his fears to rest. The creatures say the forest still has not returned to its western home. Jean observes that people can live safely only in towns and villages. Entering the forest brings you into a dangerous realm of spirits and monsters. He understands that people expand by clearing forests and building ships. The horse sees the current summoner is far from a spirit of light. It tells Rish that it avoided falling into ruin because of him. Jean says he got this land in return for helping two of them. He remembers being warned that a troublesome being was here. A beautiful woman appears and says the hero is weak but protected. Jean assures her he'll stay away while Rish affectionately licks his hand. No regrets about powering up his pantry, but he knows he needs to store more magic. Blessed with divine gifts, he is a good cook but knows he must learn to fight. He asked Rish if he had lost his memories when he lost most of his power. The scope of his contract with the gods is very limited, he thinks. Yuki Hugh admits it does not know all the details of Rish's past. With tears in its eyes, the stag proclaims that Lord Rish is great and merciful. Overwhelmed, Jean raises a hand and says he understands and wants them to stop. Settled back into his usual comfort, he prepares to enjoy a nice meal. He clasps his hands in thanks before a delicious spread of food. Slurping his noodles happily, he enjoys the rich, delicious flavor. He is considering continuing his construction and farming projects in the sanctuary. He will use his appraisal skill to find new seeds for his garden. He realizes his knowledge might let him breed new plants. He is looking forward to the day he can enjoy a tasty meal at a restaurant. He finishes his meal, thankful his body was enhanced before he arrived here. Twin mountain peaks rise majestically under a bright, clear sun. Back at his construction site, Yin breaks stones with a heavy mallet. Kneeling, he carefully smooths the earth to prepare the foundation. At night, he names a small, dark spirit wrapped in a swirl of magical lights. Walking through his growing fields, he reflects on his steady progress. He is confident the spirits will help the vegetables he took from his pantry grow. Listing the plants he's growing, he looks forward to the harvest. A quick thought about how Adelhide's subjugation force is doing crosses his mind, but he's not worried. Holding up a rope, he calls to Rish and signals he is ready for the next task. Jean playfully tosses a knotted rope toy to his spirit companion Rish. Leaping, Rich skillfully catches the toy mid-air with a triumphant snap. The proud little wolf spirit trots back with his prize, clearly pleased. Jean laughs warmly, ruffling Rish's fur and praising his impressive catch. He tells the curious rich people it's time to go back inside. He has been wanting to try a new, special experiment. In his workshop, he announces he will create a magic circle. Using the book as a guide, he grinds herbs and minerals with a pestle. Dissolving the powder in spirit-infused water, he makes a special ink. Materials ready, he begins the intricate magical drawing. Carefully, he fills the delicate ruling pen with the freshly made ink. With a compass, he draws the intricate geometric pattern from the book. Next, he adds symbols from a second grimoire and merges their instructions. Wondering aloud, he considers which spirit to summon first. A tiny winged earth fairy pops out of the circle, cheering. A cheerful gelatinous water slime jiggles into existence right after. Two fiery salamanders scurry out and chase each other around the circle. Jean snaps in frustration and tells them not to blurt things out. Worried they'll ruin his carefully drawn parchment, he sends them away. He hesitates, trying to decide how to handle the chaos. He decides to try summoning a different element, ice. Rich suddenly appears in front of him, panting happily. Jewel suddenly remembers that Rich is an ice spirit. He asked Rich to help him make ice cream sometime soon. This time, Jean says he will choose the spirit in advance. Having made the field, he decides to bring in the harvest. He draws the harvest goddess's symbol and pours magic into it. A soft puff of smoke rises from the finished magic circle. A kind old woman appears and introduces herself to him as Val. She says she oversees the Earth's abundant harvest. Jean stammers acknowledged he already knew who she was. Panic hits him as he wonders whether this is a prank or he has summoned a god. His eyes widen in shock as the ink on the circle starts to sizzle. A hand points at the disappearing circle and Jung turns around, confused. He freezes when he sees God Vafan standing directly behind him. Vafan gestures as the last of the magical ink vanishes. Jean says he followed the book's instructions, but the circle disappeared. Vafan says the book is wrong, while Gakul explains the ink's limits. Soft, otherworldly laughter suddenly fills the small workshop. Haralfa appears and tells Jane he seems to be having a lot of fun. Smiling warmly, the goddess says watching him brings her joy. Jean throws up his hands and asks when they all showed up without him noticing. Haralfa explains the room is full of tiny, pleasant spirits. Closing her eyes, she notes how comfortable the atmosphere feels. The word eel explains that these spirits are born in the morning and gone by evening. Jean was stunned to see the entire pantheon assembled. Ordale tells him he should have simply asked them about summoning spirits. Gina asks if they'll teach him and whether this is an aftercare session. Instead, the fawn-looking board decides a sparring match is in order. Outside, sunlight dapples a clearing in the forest. Ready? Vafan bites John to begin their training duel. Jean charges forward and launches a swift attack on the god. Gripping his sword tightly, he looks completely determined. Vafan blocks the attack with a single, effortless hand, stopping the blade. The blow sends Jean stumbling backward as she cries out. Landing hard on the ground, he winces in pain from the fall. The fawn looks down and says Jean's movements have worsened. Confused, Jane looks up and asks what the god means by that. He says he tried to include his adventure friend's styles. John blushes as he notices his movements have become clumsy and uncoordinated. He admits he was only copying others and never made the style his own. The Fun asked why his sword image had changed, saying it was better before. Closing his eyes, Jen searches for his mental image of swordsmanship. He remembers watching flashy fantasy movies and realistic samurai dramas. He realizes the samurai dramas had a much deeper impact on him. His current sword feels more fitting for a fantasy RPG hero. He realizes the sword's style is the problem. An ornate decapitation sword hovers before him as he considers this. He looks up, his face suddenly wide-eyed with understanding. Fafan materializes a new blade and announces it's a Japanese sword. The beautiful katana floats in hands resting in Jean's pockets, shimmering with power. He notes its fantasy-style silver chain rather than a traditional Saggio cord. Buffon stands with his arms crossed, noting it is an unusual design. Jean agrees and says the sword is from his homeland. Setting his thumb on the tuba, he prepares to draw the blade. Drawing the katana in a swift motion, he takes a ready stance. Dark energy coils around the blade as he swings with renewed confidence. Fawn asks whether he is ready to continue their training session. Jean's face is lit with determination as he asks for Fawn to proceed. Steel clashes and rings through the clearing as the spar resumes. Their blades clash again. Jean's focus is now sharp and steady. Leaping into the air, he drives his katana down in a powerful strike. Vafan easily parries the blow, his expression calm and controlled. Jean found the flashy effects in fantasy films confusing. Once he can picture it, fighting becomes easier and more fun. The fund praises his improvement in John, and John thanks him, glowing with pride. Knowing the sword can't harm its creator, Jean fights freely. With his training complete, he wonders whether he will ever surpass Vafan. Wish bounced over and showered him with affectionate licks on the cheek. Misha and Haralfa appear to congratulate him on his hard work. Surrounded by the two beautiful goddesses, Jean feels flustered. Back in the workshop, the fawn calls to him while holding out a book. Fafan points out that the interpretation in John's original book is wrong. He tells John to go to a temple in Termist in 7 days. Termist is a new island destination south of the Caval Peninsula. Vafan promises to make sure he gets the right book there. Jean knows he must save money to buy the book in a week. Passing a hooded figure, he thinks he planted many things. Rows of young, healthy seedlings grow in a tilled field. Jean glances back with a nervous smile as unease settles in. John remembered Word Day's words about the unique taste of humanoid spirits. The young god was fascinated by this world's crops. And Jung was too. Jean's meals had shifted from survival food to refined salads. He arrived in the grand, bustling commercial hub of Narua Felt. An ornate sign hanging from a building reflected the city's elegance. Alone on a restaurant terrace, he enjoyed the view of the sea. A lavish meal of steak, pâté, and rich pasta lay before him. He enjoyed the rich truffle pasta and admired the city's sophisticated cuisine. A merchant cheerfully told him his monster pelt would sell well here. Now that his finances were secure, he thought about his next move. He walked through the weaponsmith's shop, examining the different swords for sale. He thought he couldn't find another sword like his own decapitation sword. He spotted a curved blade and figured it was the closest he'd find. The shopkeeper offered to show him the spirit weapons he kept. The smith explained these were weapons made by spirits or inhabited by them. Jean realized his own sword had to be a spirit weapon forged by the fawn. The smiths insisted these weapons need a proper, comfortable place, not just magical storage. After thanking the man, Jan left with a clearer understanding of his divine blade. Back in his room, he readied himself for the daily scrying ritual. Standing over a basin of water, he was ready to watch the adventures unfold. The water swirled and began to form an image of the subjugation party. Watching the subjugation team is now part of his daily routine. Sipping his tea, he realized they were members of Amadeo's famous gold rank party. Asking nearby spirits for help made the vision very clear. He watched the warrior, unsure why two women were with him. Munching a walnut, he noticed the warrior had other followers too. He sensed these three adventurers were exceptional. He recognized the cloaked woman as a mage with a light spirit. Her vine-like bow suggests the archer had both a wind spirit and a green spirit. Seeing the warrior spirit look just like a prairie dog amused him. He couldn't figure out where a prairie dog had come from in this world. He thought about his friends and wondered where Ash's party was. In the vision, Chris's group of 5 trekked through the forest. Adelhide noted that the spirits she saw had company in Chris and Dean. John recalled his spirit's odd reaction to the smell of Dean's boots. He also remembered being swept away by Retz's impressive beard. He quietly begged his spirit not to develop any more odd tastes. The gold-ranked spirits were large, unlike his own small dark ones. The warrior now faced a large lizard monster in his vision. Grinning, the warrior charged forward with his sword to meet the beast. The mage gestured calmly and readied a powerful spell to end the fight. Whispering an incantation, she gathered her vast magical power. Her staff erupted in a brilliant flash of light that struck the creature. The lizard was killed instantly and slumped lifeless to the ground. June was amazed by the spirit's incredible magic. Then he noticed something was wrong with one of the team members. The armored man drew his sword, his face cold and expressionless. He trailed the archer as she walked away from the others. Without warning, he lifted his sword high, ready to strike her from behind. The blade cut through the air with silent, deadly intent. Spinning around, the archers deflected the sudden attack with their dagger. They were locked in a desperate fight. Her former comrade was now an enemy. Jean was impressed. The archer handled close-quarters combat with skill. He could see the man was possessed, his eyes dark and empty. A small, evil black spirit clung tightly to the man's chest. The spirit left the man and flew toward the archer. It returned to its host, who was now much weaker. Again, the spirit lunged at the archer, a blur of dark energy. It bounced back, repelled by an invisible barrier. Frozen, the archer realized the attack had been deflected. The dark spirit flew back into its original host, who was now faltering. John realized a spirit needs a vessel to keep its power. The archer could tell her ally was possessed, but she couldn't see the spirit. John watched closely, waiting to see her next move. He couldn't help wondering how anyone could defeat a dark spirit. Using a spirit weapon to kill someone who was possessed felt wrong. With grim determined, the archer drew her vine-covered spirit bow. John was horrified to realize she planned to kill the vessel itself. Pain ripped through the man as the arrow struck, dark energy bursting from the wound. Jean felt shaken, realizing how little life was worth in this world. He realized death was far more common here. Slapping his cheeks, he forced himself to calm down and focus. Breathing deeply, he returned his attention to the basin. Spirits are intangible unless their vessel is attacked, he recalled. He couldn't understand why the archer hadn't attacked while the spirit was exposed. An adventurer from another party then stumbled onto the scene. Frozen, he stared at his fallen comrade's body. Rushing toward the corpse, he was unaware of the lurking danger. John felt a sudden pang of sadness when he realized they must have been allies. Emerging from the dead man, the dark spirit searched for a new host. It burrowed into the newcomer's chest. and they cried out in pain. The archer and the man trade frantic words. Neither understands the other. Dread filled her when she realized the archer could not see the black spirit. Reports about John New Spirit site varied, with some people seeing auras and others seeing nothing. Clutching his chest, the newly possessed man felt the spirit take hold. It occurred to him that the invader might be pushing his body out. The warrior asked the mage whether she could see the other two party members. John remembered Retzi saying she was a day, or that she could see spirits inside people. He wondered what this strange, half-possessed state meant. This wasn't his job, but he knew how to fix it. With Ashen and his friends nearby, he felt he had to act. He decided firmly and inwardly that it was all right. Turning to his shadow and light spirits, he prepared to act. He asked them to darken his face and hoist him into the air. He also told them to hold up his hood without using his feet. Smiling confidently, he completed his mysterious magical disguise. Standing over the body, the adventurer did not notice the new presence. Demanding to know what had just happened, the warrior sounded confused. The archer said she didn't know, only that the man had attacked without warning. Apologizing for what she'd done, shock and regret showed on her face. Back to back, an archer and a hooded figure readied themselves for a fight. The adventurers demanded the newcomer's identity and where he came from. John smiled and said they wouldn't understand even if he told them his name. Adelhide recognized her friends and felt relieved that her secret identity as a woman was still safe. Surrounded by lights, Jane asks the sound spirits to keep his voice low. Pointing at a young man, he said his business was only with him. The young adventurer stammered, completely bewildered by the sudden attention. When Jean reached out, the man felt a strange sensation, as if fingers were passing into him. Brushing off the odd feeling, Jean told himself it was just his imagination. Quickly, he covered the man's eyes and pulled a dark spirit from his chest. The adventurer froze in horror, realizing the creature was a weeping spirit. The other party members, a warrior and a woman, stood frozen in shock. She wondered aloud whether the young adventurer had been possessed. However, she said the unconscious man on the ground had been acting strangely. John watched the man staring at his own hands in confusion. Relief washed over him when a glance at the fallen warrior showed the man was still alive. Jean knelt beside the unconscious adventurer and prepared to help. He used his healing skill, and his hands glowed with a soft, restorative light. The injured man groaned softly and began to stir from his deep unconsciousness. He opened his eyes as the strong healing magic began to work. A companion stared in disbelief and asked whether the man was really awake. Onlookers gathered as the healed warrior rose and called it a miracle. Genwatch smiled gently, glad he could help. Amazed, she could hardly believe he had recovered from such a state. Confronting John, she demanded to know who and what he really was. She narrowed her eyes and asked him about the spirits swirling around them. John Muse says he usually asks the spirits to hide, but they helped today. He looked at the woman and realized she could clearly see them. Suspicious, she asked if he had just picked up these spirits somewhere. Jean realized the first man's possession had drawn his attention to them. A soft sigh escaped him as the others stared at the back of his cloak. Adelhide felt her brother's intense stare and hoped he had not seen through her disguise. The burly adventurer called to Jing to wait as he began to leave. Activating his transference magic, Jean's form dissolved into particles of light. In an instant, he was gone from the clearing, leaving them all behind. When he reappeared elsewhere, he held the captured spirit and hoped he had solved at least one problem. He chose to release the large dark spirit deep in the forest. Another powerful spirit came to mind, a black horse that had kept its will. He knew these dark spirits caused great pain by preying on others. The spirits bound to his contract were forbidden to feed on one another. Smiling at the small creature in his hands, he decided it was time to go home. He gazed toward the distant roof of his manor beneath a starry sky. Once home, he thanked the small fairy-like spirits for lending him their power. Standing over the bowl, he wondered what had happened after he left the adventures. A quick cut returned to the clearing where the group stood. He pictured them bowing deeply to the ground as a profound apology. Smiling at Riley, he thought they were apologizing even though they had nearly killed him. He believed he was possessed and the archer had targeted him. He decided to ask Adelhide what had happened the next time he saw her. Now we are inside the peaceful, rustic home of the Dionio family, she cried out as his younger siblings gleefully tried to loosen him up. Jean arrived and told the Shibas to just let them peel his clothes off. The younger children eagerly asked if they could help, and Jean agreed did too. Bursting with mischief, the twins cheered and pounced on their older brother. She was just as close in flight as the man who cheerfully removed them from his body. She returned with a fresh change of clothes for her son, who was now shirtless. She said their clothes get dirty and Jean offered to wash everything. Mortified, Shiva complained that John had to see him like that. His mother dismissed him and cheerfully told him to wash up at the well. John waved while Shiva yelled at his mother not to involve their guest. John tied his hair back and rolled up his sleeves, ready to work. Amid the world's unbearable lack of sanitation, he thought about his studies. He pictured the filth on the roads pouring into houses when it rained. The thought of cleaning horse dung and turning it into fuel made him grimace. He remembered other farmers he'd met who slept on hay in their barns. He understood people here lived for the moment because tomorrow was never certain. Feeling he could not change the world, he helped his friends. Determined to give the kind Dionisio family a clean home, he began sweeping. The afternoon sky shines down on the transformed, tidy farmstead. When the family came back, their home was spotless, especially the newly refurbished oven. She stared in awe and asked if John was some kind of cleaning genius. Everyone praised his beautiful work, and Jean said the well was all that remained. Shiva offered to make tea for Jean, who accepted gratefully. The mother then asked John to get some quail and eggs for dinner. The youngest children raised their hands quickly, eager to volunteer for the task. Later, a friend asked Jane whether he really enjoyed cleaning. John said plainly that he hated cleaning, which confused his friend. He said he simply can't stand unsanitary places, so he cleans them. The mother arrived with dinner, winking and saying John just likes things to be beautiful. She set a large, steaming bowl of roasted quail and leeks on the table. Recognizing it as a specialty, Jean said it looked delicious. Using his appraisal skill, he judged the leeks to be especially flavorful. The skill validated the recipe, and he stored it in his memory for later use. Smiling warmly, the mother invited everyone to begin their meal. The family joined hands and offered thanks for the warm meal they shared. Watching with a soft smile, she believed they were his ideal family. He wondered whether he too would ever have such a warm family. Brushing the thought aside, he blushed a little and took a bite. Sun-bleached ruins lined the coast of Thermost Island. She thought about visiting the temple before spending her money on local crafts. He recalled that the god Roar Day had recommended this exact temple. He walked toward the impressive stone building, its steeple stretching up to the sky. Inside, a calm elderly man with a long white beard greeted him. John raised his hand politely and asked the old man about a certain book. He recognized John's black hair and purple eyes as the ones foretold in God's prophecy. He confirmed he had been told Jean would come to the temple. The old man closed his eyes and said he had a message for him. Jean looked puzzled and wondered aloud what kind of message he might have received. Calling it a message felt strange when it was delivered in person. He handed a book to a woman, his task now complete. Jean smiles gently and confirms he understands the situation. Gokli, the ancient god, beckons him to follow down the corridor. Their boots click in a steady rhythm on the polished stone floor. Jean comes to a sudden stop, his eyes fixed on something unexpected ahead. Together they stand in a vast sunlit home, frozen in place. A life-size stone statue of a robed figure stands silently before them. He wonders if this solemn, aged statue could be the god Roar Day. Gal gravely says he must take an oath of complete silence. A sudden vision of a young Roardale flashes by, his voice promising to swear. With his business finished, Gackle turns to an ornate wall mirror. His hand presses against the glass, which shimmers with a soft light. His hand glides through the mirror's surface as if it were water. Jean stares in disbelief, realizing it must be a hidden door. A lone, flickering candle emerges from the inky darkness of the passage. A robed figure with a shadowed face steps forward holding a light. John is stunned by the sudden arrival of this keeper of secrets.